Hello there, and welcome to Midnight Geography. Tonight we'll drift into the contemplation of Socotra, an island that exists as Earth's living museum of evolutionary isolation. Islands are not merely land surrounded by water, they are nature's laboratories, where separation becomes transformation, where distance permits divergence, where the ordinary rules of botanical and geological development are rewritten by winds and time. Socotra represents what happens when a fragment of continent drifts into centuries of solitude, when endemic becomes the rule rather than the exception, when alien landscapes emerge not from imagination, but from the patient work of isolation and adaptation. If you enjoy these peaceful geographical explorations, consider liking and subscribing. It helps other curious minds find their way here too. But for now, let's begin. Socotra Island lies in the Indian Ocean, floating 240 kilometers east of the Horn of Africa and 380 kilometers south of the Arabian Peninsula, belonging to Yemen, yet seeming to belong to no particular time or place. This is a landscape that exists in geological memory, a remnant of ancient continental configurations that once joined Africa and Arabia before tectonic forces pulled them apart. The island's isolation is not merely geographic, but temporal, as if this piece of land decided to preserve something the mainland continents chose to abandon. The waters around Socotra hold the island in a kind of suspended animation, maintaining its strangeness through sheer distance from the evolutionary pressures that shape more connected lands. When you approach Socotra by sea, as all visitors must during certain seasons, you understand immediately that you are entering a place where Earth's rules have been quietly rewritten. The island stretches 125 kilometers from east to west and reaches 42 kilometers at its widest point, creating a limestone plateau that rises steadily from coastal plains toward interior mountains. At the center of this uplift stands Jabal Skand, the highest point, reaching 1,125 meters into the tropical sky. This is not a dramatic volcanic peak, but rather a patient accumulation of ancient seabed raised slowly over millions of years. The plateau's surface bears the marks of this maritime origin. Limestone formed from coral reefs that once flourished beneath warm, shallow seas now stands exposed to monsoon winds and scorching sun. The topography creates distinct zones of life, each elevation hosting its own assembly of endemic species adapted to precise combinations of temperature, moisture, and exposure. From the coast to the mountain peaks, Socotra reveals itself not as a single island, but as a vertical archipelago of microclimates stacked upon one another. Approximately 6 million years ago, during the Pliocene epoch, Socotra separated from mainland Africa, beginning an evolutionary journey that would transform this fragment of continent into one of Earth's most botanically unique places. The separation occurred gradually as the Arabian Peninsula rotated away from Africa, opening the Gulf of Aden and leaving Socotra isolated in the widening gap. This was not a sudden catastrophic event, but rather a slow drift measured in centimeters per year, imperceptible within any human lifetime, yet inexorable across geological timescales. The plants and animals that found themselves on this drifting fragment faced a choice encoded in their genetics: adapt to isolation or perish. Most mainland species eventually disappeared from Socotra, unable to adjust to the island's harsh conditions. But some lineages persisted, evolving slowly into forms increasingly divergent from their continental ancestors. 6 million years is sufficient time for nature to experiment extensively with body plans and survival strategies, and Socotra's isolation provided the perfect laboratory for such experimentation. The dragon's blood tree, Dracena cinnaberi, grows exclusively on Socotra's highlands, its umbrella-shaped canopy, designed to capture coastal fog in an otherwise arid climate. These trees appear almost architectural, their branches dividing repeatedly into symmetrical patterns that create dense shade beneath the canopy while presenting minimal surface area to the desiccating winds. The shape serves multiple purposes. It channels rare rainfall toward the trunk and root system. It reduces water loss through transpiration during the scorching summer months, and it creates a microclimate beneath the crown where humidity remains slightly higher than the surrounding air. Dragon's blood trees grow slowly, adding perhaps a few centimeters each year, their growth rings recording centuries of climate variation. Some specimens standing today began their lives when medieval Arab traders sailed past Socotra, collecting resins and spices. The trees cluster most densely in the highland fog zone, between 600 and 1,400 meters elevation, where their distinctive silhouettes create forests that appear lifted from imagination rather than botany textbooks. When the bark of the dragon's blood tree is cut or damaged, it weeps a dark red resin that ancient peoples used as dye, medicine, and varnish. This crimson sap, which hardens upon exposure to air, gave the tree its common name, dragon's blood, and fueled centuries of speculation about the island's mysterious flora. Roman naturalists wrote about this substance, and medieval alchemists valued it for various preparations. By the Renaissance, dragon's blood resin from Socotra was being exported to Italy, where violin makers discovered that it produced a deep red varnish with unique acoustic properties. The resin contains compounds that protect the tree from fungal infections and insect damage, a chemical defense evolved during millions of years of isolation. Local Socotri people traditionally used the resin for medicinal purposes, treating digestive ailments and applying it to wounds for its antiseptic properties. The harvesting of dragon's blood, however, stresses the trees, creating wounds that take years to heal. Modern conservation efforts attempt to balance traditional use with the need to preserve these ancient, slow-growing organisms that cannot quickly replace themselves in a changing climate. The Hagahur Mountains form Socotra's central spine, their limestone peaks catching monsoon moisture that the coastal plains never receive. These mountains are not rugged or dramatic in the alpine sense, but rather worn and rounded by millions of years of erosion, their surfaces carved into wadis and gorges that channel brief winter rains toward underground aquifers. The rock itself tells the story of ancient seas, layers of limestone containing fossilized corals and marine organisms, evidence that these peaks once lay beneath tropical waters. Tectonic uplift raised the seabed gradually, creating the island's mountainous backbone and exposing these marine sediments to air and weather. The mountains intercept moisture-laden winds during winter months, forcing air upward where it cools and condenses into clouds that wrap the peaks in fog. This orographic effect creates a life-giving moisture source in an otherwise harsh environment, allowing dragon's blood forests and endemic plants to survive where they would otherwise perish from drought. The mountains thus function as Socotra's water towers, capturing and storing the precious moisture that sustains the island's unique ecosystems. Socotra's coastal areas receive less than 130 millimeters of rainfall annually, an amount so meager that the shoreline appears almost desert-like, with sparse vegetation and sand dunes forming along eastern beaches. Yet the mountain peaks can capture up to 1,000 millimeters annually through a combination of brief winter rains and persistent fog that condenses on vegetation and rock surfaces. This dramatic moisture gradient, compressed into a horizontal distance of less than 50 kilometers, creates radically different ecosystems within sight of each other. The coastal plains support only drought-adapted succulents and shrubs, their root systems designed to exploit brief periods of moisture availability. As elevation increases, vegetation becomes progressively more diverse and dense, until the highland fog zone supports relatively lush communities of dragon's blood trees, endemic aloes, and other moisture-dependent species. This vertical zonation mirrors patterns found in much larger mountain ranges, yet Socotra compresses such diversity into a relatively small island. The moisture captured by the highlands seeps slowly underground, emerging as springs at geological contact zones where porous limestone meets impermeable layers, providing water for the scattered human settlements in the island's interior. The desert rose, Adenium obesum socotranum, stores water in its swollen trunk, growing in boulder fields where its pink flowers emerge directly from bulbous, sculptural stems. These plants appear almost sculptural themselves, their thick trunks resembling melted wax frozen in irregular shapes, their surfaces smooth and pale gray. The desert rose belongs to the same family as oleander, and like its relative, contains toxic sap that protects it from browsing animals. During the brief periods following winter rains, these plants explode into bloom, their pink and white flowers appearing in clusters at the tips of short branches. The contrast is striking. These swollen, almost grotesque trunks, suddenly adorned with delicate blossoms that seem too refined for such a harsh landscape. Desert roses grow slowly, accumulating water reserves over decades, their caudex, the swollen stem base, expanding gradually as the plant ages. They favor rocky slopes where soil accumulates in crevices, their root systems extending deep into fractures in the limestone, seeking moisture that persists long after surface water disappears. Some specimens achieve remarkable sizes, their trunks exceeding a meter in diameter. These ancient individuals perhaps living a century or more in their boulder field habitats. Of the 825 plant species documented on Socotra, 307 exist nowhere else on Earth, giving the island a 37% endemism rate that rivals the Galapagos and exceeds most other island systems. This remarkable statistic represents millions of years of isolated evolution, of species adapting to Socotra's unique combination of climate, geology, and ecological opportunity, without the complicating influence of mainland plant communities. The endemic species range from tiny herbs that complete their life cycles in weeks to massive trees that live for centuries, from coastal salt-tolerant shrubs to highland species that endure occasional frost. Each represents a unique evolutionary solution to survival on this isolated limestone platform surrounded by ocean. The patterns of endemism reveal Socotra's biogeographic history. Many endemic plants show relationships to African species, evidence of the island's ancient connection to the African continent before tectonic drift separated them. Others appear related to Arabian Peninsula flora, suggesting some degree of connection or seed dispersal across the narrower strait to the north. Still others belong to lineages so ancient and so divergent that their closest relatives remain uncertain. These botanical mysteries representing deep evolutionary experiments whose origins have been obscured by time. The Hom Hill Protected Area in northeastern Socotra contains natural infinity pools formed in limestone, where fresh water collects in turquoise basins overlooking the ocean, 700 meters below. These pools form where harder layers of limestone resist erosion, while softer layers beneath wash away, creating shallow depressions that fill with water during winter rains and persist through much of the dry season. The water remains remarkably clear, its blue-green color resulting from dissolved minerals and the white limestone D-min below. Standing at the edge of these pools, you experience a vertiginous sensation. The pool's calm surface reflects sky and clouds, while beyond its rim, cliffs plunge precipitously toward the Indian Ocean far below. Dragon's blood trees surround the pools, their reflections wavering in the water's surface, creating compositions that appear almost too perfect to be natural. The pools support small populations of endemic aquatic insects and provide critical water sources for birds and other wildlife during the harsh summer drought. Local people have used these pools for generations, though their remote location in the highland interior means they remain relatively undisturbed. The Hom Hill area protects not just the pools, but the entire watershed, preserving the endemic plant communities that stabilize soils and regulate water flow in this fragile ecosystem. Socotra's Hawk Cave extends 3 kilometers into limestone cliffs on the island's northern coast, its chambers decorated with stalactites and inscriptions left by sailors across 2 millennia. The cave's entrance is dramatic, a dark opening in the cliff face that requires climbing steeply through dragon's blood trees and boulders before reaching the threshold where sunlight fails and limestone passages extend into darkness. Inside, the cave reveals itself as a complex system of chambers and tunnels carved by underground water flow over millions of years. Stalactites descend from ceilings like frozen waterfalls, their surfaces dripping with moisture even during the dry season. Some formations have grown so large they've merged with stalagmites rising from the cave floor, creating columns that span floor to ceiling. The deepest chambers contain underground pools of perfectly still water, their surfaces reflecting the limestone formations above with mirror-like clarity. The air inside remains remarkably cool compared to the scorching heat outside, and the silence is absolute, except for the occasional drip of water echoing through the passages. This coolness and shelter made the cave attractive to sailors throughout history, providing refuge during the violent monsoon season when Socotra's coasts became impassable. Inside Hawk Cave, archaeologists have found inscriptions in South Arabian, Ethiopic, Greek, and Sanskrit, evidence of ancient mariners seeking shelter during monsoon season. These inscriptions cover the cave walls near the entrance where ambient light still penetrates, carved by sailors waiting out storms or making offerings for safe passage. The South Arabian script dates to the early centuries of the Common Era, when traders from the Arabian Peninsula navigated between the Red Sea and India, often stopping at Socotra to collect dragon's blood resin and other valuable products. Ethiopian inscriptions suggest connections to the ancient Aksumite kingdom across the Gulf of Aden, sailors from Africa reaching Socotra and leaving their mark in this limestone sanctuary. Greek inscriptions, fewer in number, point to the occasional presence of Mediterranean traders who ventured into the Indian Ocean during the late Roman period, following trade routes established by earlier mariners. The Sanskrit inscriptions are perhaps most intriguing, suggesting that Indian Ocean traders from the subcontinent also knew of Socotra and used the cave as shelter, their voyages carrying them westward from India toward Africa and Arabia. Together, these inscriptions transform Hawk Cave into a manuscript of ancient maritime history, a guest book signed across centuries by sailors from diverse cultures who shared the common need for shelter from the monsoon's fury. The cave's entrance sits 250 meters above sea level, requiring a steep climb through dragon's blood trees that guard the approach like sentinels. The trail to the cave ascends through boulder fields and rocky outcrops, winding between the distinctive umbrella-shaped trees whose crowns provide intermittent shade during the climb. The trees here grow from crevices in the limestone, their roots extending deep into fractures where moisture persists longer than on exposed surfaces. Some specimens appear ancient, their trunks thick and gnarled, their bark scarred by centuries of wind and weather. The climb itself becomes a meditation on effort and elevation, each step taking you higher above the coastal plain while the cave entrance remains hidden behind rocky outcrops until the final approach. When you finally reach the threshold, breathless from the steep ascent, the temperature drops noticeably as you step from harsh sunlight into the cave's cool interior. The contrast is profound, from the bright, desiccating heat of the coastal cliff face to the dim, moist coolness of the limestone passage. This transition must have felt even more dramatic to ancient sailors, their arrival at the cave marking a shift from the danger of exposed coasts during monsoon storms to the safety of stone chambers where they could wait for favorable winds. Socotra's frankincense trees, Boswellia elongata, grow twisted and gnarled on cliff faces, their bark peeling in papery sheets that reveal green photosynthetic tissue beneath. These trees seem to defy gravity, growing from nearly vertical rock faces where their roots must find purchase in tiny crevices and fractures. The trunk and larger branches twist dramatically, responding to wind stress and the irregular substrate on which they grow, creating sculptural forms that appear ancient regardless of the tree's actual age. The bark exfoliates continuously, shedding thin layers that curl and peel away, exposing fresh bark beneath that retains photosynthetic capacity even when leaves are scarce during summer drought. This adaptation allows the tree to continue producing energy through photosynthesis, even when water scarcity forces it to drop most of its foliage, the green bark tissue supplementing the reduced leaf area. Frankincense trees produce a resin similar to their more famous relatives on the Arabian Peninsula and in Somalia, though Socotra's variety has its own chemical signature and aromatic properties. The trees bloom during winter months, their small white flowers appearing in clusters at branch tips, attracting endemic insects that pollinate them before the intense summer heat returns. The island produces frankincense resin, considered superior to mainland varieties, though Socotra's production quantities remain small due to the tree's scattered highland distribution. The resin forms in response to damage when bark is wounded by weather, animal browsing, or human harvesting. The tree produces aromatic compounds that seal the injury and protect against infection. This defensive secretion hardens into translucent golden droplets that can be collected and burned as incense or processed for various uses. Socotra's frankincense contains slightly different ratios of aromatic compounds compared to Boswellia sacra from Oman or Boswellia carteri from Somalia, giving it a distinctive fragrance that connoisseurs can identify. However, the trees grow so scattered across Socotra's rocky highlands, often on cliff faces difficult or dangerous to access, that systematic harvesting has never been commercially viable. The small amounts collected traditionally by local people were used locally or traded in limited quantities, never entering the global frankincense market in significant volumes. This limited exploitation may have helped preserve Socotra's frankincense populations, while mainland sources faced overexploitation during periods of high demand for incense in religious and cultural ceremonies. Kalancia Beach on Socotra's western tip stretches 3 kilometers of white sand, where the island's only substantial fishing village has operated for centuries. The beach forms a gentle arc between rocky headlands, its sand composed of pulverized coral and shells ground to powder by wave action and time. The water here glows with an almost unreal turquoise color, the result of sunlight penetrating the shallow sandy bottom and reflecting back through the clear water. Behind the beach, the village of Kalancia clusters around a few palm-shaded streets, its houses built from coral stone blocks and palm wood, following architectural traditions adapted to the island's harsh summer climate. The village has existed here for generations, its people making their living from the sea, sailing traditional wooden boats to fishing grounds offshore where currents bring tuna, kingfish, and other species through Socotra's waters. During summer monsoon months, when winds make fishing impossible, the village turns inward, repairing boats and nets, maintaining houses, waiting for the season when the sea once again becomes accessible. The beach remains relatively quiet, even during calmer months, its beauty known to few outside Socotra, a 3-kilometer stretch of sand that could rival any tropical beach, yet sees only occasional visitors. During the southwest monsoon from June to September, winds exceeding 100 kilometers per hour make Socotra's waters nearly impassable, historically isolating the island for months each year. These winds blow with relentless force, churning the ocean into steep seas that make navigation extremely dangerous for any vessel, whether traditional sailing craft or modern powered boats. The monsoon winds result from differential heating between the Asian landmass and the Indian Ocean, creating a powerful atmospheric circulation that drives winds from southwest to northeast across the entire Indian Ocean basin. Socotra sits directly in the path of this seasonal wind system, experiencing its full force as summer progresses. Waves build to heights of 5 meters or more, and the constant wind makes even anchoring near shore hazardous as vessels are pushed toward rocky coastlines. For centuries, this seasonal isolation shaped Socotri culture and ecology profoundly. The island's people learned to live self-sufficiently during the monsoon months, storing food and resources in anticipation of the period when no boats could arrive from or depart to the mainland. The isolation also protected Socotra's endemic species from invasive plants and animals that might have arrived on boats during calmer seasons, the monsoon acting as a natural quarantine that preserved the island's biological uniqueness. This seasonal isolation allowed Socotra's culture to preserve a unique language, Socotri, which has no written form and belongs to the modern South Arabian language family. Socotri descended from ancient Semitic languages spoken across southern Arabia thousands of years ago, linguistic relatives that have largely disappeared from the mainland, replaced by Arabic during the Islamic expansion. But on Socotra, protected by monsoon-enforced isolation and cultural continuity, this ancient language persisted, evolving slowly in its island environment while maintaining features that link it to languages spoken millennia ago. The language contains sounds not found in Arabic or other major Semitic languages, phonemes preserved from more ancient forms of speech. Socotri has no traditional writing system. It exists purely as spoken communication, passed from generation to generation through oral tradition. The lack of writing may have helped preserve the language's archaic features, preventing the standardizing influence that written forms often impose. Today, Socotri faces pressures from Arabic, which serves as the language of education, government, and communication with the outside world. Younger Socotris often speak Arabic more fluently than their ancestral tongue, and linguists worry that Socotri may disappear within a generation or two unless efforts to document and preserve it succeed. Socotri contains words for botanical and marine phenomena that exist nowhere else, linguistic fossils of isolation preserved in daily speech. The language includes distinct terms for growth stages of dragon's blood trees, for different types of fog that bring moisture to the highlands, for specific behaviors of fish species in coastal waters, for the particular quality of light before monsoon storms arrive. These words represent knowledge accumulated over centuries of close observation, environmental understanding encoded in vocabulary that makes perfect sense to Socotris, but has no equivalent in other languages. A Socotri speaker can describe precisely which endemic plant they're referring to, using terms that distinguish it from similar species, can discuss seasonal changes in ocean conditions using words that capture subtle differences in wave patterns and water color that predict fish movements. This linguistic richness reflects a culture deeply attuned to their environment, people whose survival depended on reading signs in nature that others might miss. As Socotra speakers become fewer and the language retreats before Arabic, these words and the knowledge they contain risk disappearing, environmental understanding evaporating like morning fog once the generations who remember the old language are gone. Linguists working to document Socotra race against this clock, recording not just words, but the entire knowledge system the language preserves. The cucumber tree, Dendrosychios socotranus, represents Earth's only tree-form cucumber species, growing 6 meters tall with spiny trunks and small, inedible fruit. This plant confounds botanical expectations. Cucumbers are typically herbaceous vines that sprawl across ground or climb using tendrils, completing their life cycles in a single growing season before dying back. Yet here on Socotra, isolated from mainland cucumber species for millions of years, evolution produced a perennial tree that stores water in its swollen trunk, developing woody tissue and standing upright like a succulent version of its vine relatives. The trunk appears almost grotesque, pale gray-green and covered with short spines that likely deter browsing animals. During summer drought, the tree sheds most of its leaves, reducing water loss, its photosynthetic bark taking over energy production until rains return. When conditions improve, small lobed leaves emerge along the branches, and the tree produces small yellow flowers, followed by cucumber-like fruits that remain small and contain compounds that make them unpalatable to most animals. The cucumber tree grows in the driest parts of Socotra's interior, often in rocky areas where little else survives, its water-storing trunk allowing it to persist through months without rainfall. It stands as testament to evolution's creativity, showing how extreme isolation and harsh conditions can transform even familiar plant families into forms barely recognizable from their original templates. Socotra's limestone formed from ancient coral reefs that grew when this land sat beneath warm, shallow seas during the Cretaceous period, 70 million years ago. The stone beneath your feet on Socotra's plateau is not really stone in the way we typically imagine rock. It is the accumulated bodies of countless coral polyps, algae, and other marine organisms that built reef structures in tropical waters, their calcium carbonate skeletons compacting over millions of years into the solid limestone that now forms the island's foundation. If you examine the rock closely, you can sometimes see fossilized coral structures preserved in cross-section, the individual polyp chambers still visible as tiny honeycomb patterns in the stone. These are not mere rocks, but time capsules, holding evidence of ecosystems that thrived when dinosaurs still walked the earth, when the geography of this region bore no resemblance to its current configuration. The limestone varies in hardness depending on the original composition of the reef. Layers that contained more coral tend to be more durable, while layers rich in shell fragments erode more easily, creating the differential weathering patterns that give Socotra's landscape its distinctive terraced appearance. Walking across this ancient seabed, now exposed to air and weather, you are traversing a vertical slice through deep time, each layer representing centuries of slow accumulation in those vanished seas. The island's geological uplift began 20 million years ago as tectonic forces raised these former seabeds into mountains, creating dramatic cliffs along the northern coast where limestone layers are clearly visible, stacked one atop another like pages in a book written in stone. The uplift resulted from the same tectonic processes that opened the Gulf of Aden and separated the Arabian Peninsula from Africa. As the continental plates pulled apart, blocks of crust tilted and rose, lifting Socotra from the ocean floor toward the sky. This was not a sudden, catastrophic event, but rather a gradual elevation, the island rising perhaps a few millimeters per year, imperceptible within human lifetimes, but inexorable across geological ages. The uplift continues today, though at rates so slow that only precise GPS measurements can detect the motion. The northern cliffs display this uplift history most dramatically. Vertical faces where you can trace individual limestone layers formed in ancient seas, now exposed hundreds of meters above the current ocean surface. Waves that once broke against coral reefs now crash far below, against cliffs that stand as monuments to the patient power of tectonic forces. The uplift also tilted the island slightly, creating its characteristic profile. Higher peaks in the east and center, sloping gradually toward lower western coastal plains. Detwa Lagoon near Kalancia forms a protected saltwater basin where sandbars shift with lunar tides, creating channels that change shape throughout each month. The lagoon sits behind a curved barrier beach, its waters separated from the open ocean by a narrow strip of white sand that waves have built up over centuries. During high tide, seawater flows over and through this barrier, filling the lagoon and connecting it to the ocean beyond. As tide recedes, the barrier emerges more fully, and the lagoon becomes increasingly isolated, its waters warming in the tropical sun and becoming more saline as evaporation concentrates dissolved salts. The sandbars within the lagoon migrate and reshape continuously, responding to tidal currents, wave action during storms, and the subtle influences of longshore drift that moves sand along the coast. Channels that flow deep and straight during one lunar cycle may become shallow and meandering by the next full moon, the sand rearranging itself according to patterns too complex for simple prediction. The lagoon's waters glow with an extraordinary turquoise color, particularly at low tide when the shallow depth allows sunlight to illuminate the sandy bottom, the light reflecting back through the clear water in shades of blue and green that seem almost artificial in their intensity. Wading birds frequent the lagoon's margins during low tide, their legs reflected in the still water as they hunt for small fish and crustaceans stranded in the shrinking pools. The lagoon's waters host juvenile fish that use the shallow, warm environment as nursery grounds before migrating to deeper ocean waters. The protected conditions inside the lagoon provide ideal habitat for young fish. The shallow water warms quickly under the tropical sun, creating temperatures that accelerate growth rates, while the barrier beach reduces wave action, and predators from the open ocean find it difficult to access the lagoon's interior. Juvenile rabbitfish, parrotfish, and other reef species shelter among the sparse seagrass beds that grow in the lagoon's bottom sediments, feeding on algae and small invertebrates while they grow large enough to survive in more exposed habitats. The tidal exchange brings fresh nutrients and plankton into the lagoon twice daily, providing food for the growing fish populations while also flushing waste products out to sea. This nursery function makes the lagoon ecologically valuable far beyond its small size. Many of the adult fish that inhabit Socotra's coral reefs likely spent their juvenile stages in Detwa Lagoon or similar protected coastal habitats around the island. The lagoon thus serves as a critical link in the marine ecosystem, a nursery that replenishes reef fish populations that would otherwise decline from natural mortality and fishing pressure. Socotra's Dehamri Marine Protected Area encompasses 60 square kilometers of coral reef, where 253 species of reef-building corals create underwater gardens in the clear waters along the island's northern coast. The reef grows in relatively shallow water, between 5 and 30 meters deep, where sunlight penetrates sufficiently to support the photosynthetic algae that live symbiotically within coral tissues, providing energy that allows the reef to grow. The coral colonies take countless forms: massive boulder corals that grow slowly but can live for centuries, branching staghorn and elkhorn corals that grow more rapidly but are fragile, plate corals that orient horizontally to maximize light capture, brain corals whose surface patterns resemble the convolutions of cerebral tissue. Each coral is actually a colony of thousands of individual polyps, tiny animals related to sea anemones, working collectively to build the calcium carbonate structure that forms the reef framework. Fish of every imaginable color dart among the coral formations: bright blue damselfish defending their algae gardens, schools of yellow snappers flowing over the reef like living clouds, parrotfish scraping algae from coral surfaces with their beak-like jaws, their feeding producing the characteristic crunching sounds that fill the underwater soundscape. The reef creates a three-dimensional habitat of extraordinary complexity, its nooks and crevices providing shelter for octopuses, moray eels, lobsters, and countless smaller creatures that emerge primarily at night. These reefs escaped the coral bleaching events that devastated other Indian Ocean reef systems in 1998 and 2016. Their survival attributed to cooler upwelling currents that buffer Socotra's waters against the extreme temperatures that stress corals elsewhere. Coral bleaching occurs when water temperatures rise above the narrow range that corals can tolerate, causing the symbiotic algae to be expelled from coral tissues, leaving the corals white and vulnerable to starvation and disease. The massive bleaching events that struck reefs worldwide during recent decades killed corals across vast areas of the Indian Ocean, the Caribbean, and the Great Barrier Reef, transforming once vibrant underwater gardens into graveyards of white coral skeletons. Yet Socotra's reefs remained largely intact through these events, protected by their unusual oceanographic setting. The island sits in a zone where upwelling brings cooler, nutrient-rich water from the depths during the southwest monsoon season, creating conditions that moderate water temperatures even as the broader Indian Ocean warms. This thermal refuge effect has allowed Socotra's corals to persist while nearby reef systems collapsed, making the island's marine protected areas critically important as genetic reservoirs that could help repopulate damaged reefs elsewhere if conditions improve. The survival of these reefs offers a glimpse of hope in an era of widespread coral decline, evidence that some reef systems may prove more resilient than others to the warming ocean. The island supports 10 endemic species of birds, including the Socotra starling, which nests in limestone caves and has adapted to the island's harsh summer drought by seeking moisture and insects in cave interiors where humidity remains higher than outside. The starling appears unremarkable at first glance, gray-brown plumage without the iridescent colors that characterize many starling species, but its behavior reveals sophisticated adaptations to island life. During the hottest months, when temperatures exceed 40 degrees Celsius on the coastal plains and insects become scarce, the starlings retreat to caves where cooler temperatures and residual moisture support small populations of cave-dwelling insects. The birds nest in crevices within the limestone, often in the twilight zone near cave entrances, where some ambient light penetrates, but conditions remain cooler than outside. Their young fledge during the brief period following winter rains when insect populations explode, timing their reproduction to maximize food availability during the energetically demanding weeks of feeding nestlings. The Socotra starling's survival strategy reflects the broader pattern of island adaptation, specialized behaviors, and ecological relationships that work perfectly in Socotra's unique environment, but would likely fail in more competitive mainland ecosystems where generalist species dominate. Socotra's sunbird, Chalcomitra balfouri, pollinates the island's endemic aloes with its curved beak, maintaining pollination relationships that developed over millions of years of coevolution between the bird and the plants it visits. The sunbird appears jewel-like in proper light. Males display iridescent feathers that shimmer with blues and purples, though the colors remain subtle compared to the more flamboyant sunbirds found in African and Asian forests. The curved beak evolved to match the curved flowers of Socotra's aloes, allowing the bird to probe deep into tubular blossoms to access nectar, while simultaneously transferring pollen from flower to flower. This pollination service is essential for the aloes, which depend on the sunbirds for reproduction. Without the birds, the plants would fail to set seed, and their populations would gradually decline. The relationship demonstrates the interconnected nature of island ecosystems, where species depend on each other in ways that leave little room for disruption. If the sunbird population were to collapse from disease or habitat loss, the endemic aloes would face reproductive crisis, and their decline would in turn affect the insects and other creatures that depend on the aloes for food and shelter. These cascading dependencies make island ecosystems simultaneously elegant and fragile, each species playing roles that cannot easily be substituted by others. The island's interior plateau, known as Diksam, sits at 600 meters elevation, where the highest concentration of dragon's blood trees creates forests that appear prehistoric, their umbrella canopies crowding together to form a continuous shade layer beneath which little understory vegetation grows. The Diksam Plateau represents the heart of Socotra's endemic flora, the elevation and exposure to fog creating ideal conditions for dragon's blood trees and their associated plant communities. Walking through these forests feels like entering a landscape from another era. The trees' distinctive shapes create a canopy unlike any other forest on Earth, their branches spreading horizontally before dividing into ever finer twigs that support dense crowns of blade-like leaves. The forest floor beneath remains relatively bare, carpeted with fallen leaves and occasional boulders, but lacking the lush understory typical of wetter forests. This open structure results partly from the dense shade cast by the dragon's blood canopies, which blocks most sunlight from reaching the ground, and partly from the harsh summer drought that eliminates plants unable to survive months without rain. During the brief period after winter rains, however, the forest floor transforms as herbaceous plants emerge from dormant seeds, their flowers creating temporary carpets of color before the summer heat returns, and these ephemeral plants complete their life cycles and disappear once more. These highland forests exist in a fog zone where humidity condenses beneath the trees' canopies, creating microclimates up to 10 degrees cooler than surrounding areas and maintaining moisture levels that allow plants to survive that would otherwise perish in Socotra's arid climate. The dragon's blood trees themselves create and maintain this microclimate through their distinctive canopy structure. The dense umbrella shape intercepts fog and low clouds, causing water droplets to condense on the leaves and branches, then drip slowly to the ground below. This fog drip can add significant moisture to the soil beneath each tree, creating zones of slightly higher water availability that extend outward from the trunk. The cooler temperatures result from shade and evaporative cooling, as moisture evaporates from leaf surfaces and soil, absorbing heat and lowering air temperature. Other endemic plants grow specifically in these microclimate zones, species that cannot survive in more exposed locations but thrive beneath the protective canopy of dragon's blood trees. This creates a positive feedback loop. The trees create conditions that support other plants, which in turn stabilize soil and contribute organic matter that improves water retention, which benefits the trees themselves. The fog zone thus represents a delicate equilibrium maintained by the interaction of topography, climate, and vegetation, an ecosystem that could potentially collapse if any component changed too dramatically. Socotra's aloe species, including Aloe perryi, grow in dense clusters on rocky slopes, their thick leaves storing water through 8-month dry seasons when no rain falls and temperatures soar above 40 degrees Celsius. The aloes exemplify succulent survival strategies. Their leaves contain water-storing tissues protected by thick cuticles that minimize evaporation, while their shallow but extensive root systems can quickly absorb moisture when brief rains arrive. Aloe perryi produces tall flower spikes during winter months, their tubular red and yellow flowers attracting sunbirds that feed on nectar while simultaneously pollinating the blooms. The leaves contain medicinal compounds that local Socotri people have used traditionally for treating burns, digestive ailments, and skin conditions, knowledge passed through generations about which plants provide which remedies. The aloes grow particularly abundantly on rocky slopes with good drainage, where their roots never sit in saturated soil that could cause rot. Individual plants can live for decades, slowly expanding into multi-headed clumps that eventually split apart as the oldest central sections die and peripheral rosettes continue growing. The dense clustering provides some protection against herbivory. Goats browsing on aloes must work harder to access the inner leaves when plants grow tightly together. And the spine-tipped leaves create a barrier that discourages casual browsing. The latex from Socotra aloe was historically exported for medicinal use and appears in ancient Egyptian medical texts, suggesting trade routes extending back 3,000 years that connected this remote island to Mediterranean civilizations. The ancient Egyptians valued aloe for its purgative and healing properties, using processed latex in various medical preparations. Socotra's location made it accessible to Arab traders who sailed between the Red Sea and India, stopping at the island to collect dragon's blood resin, aloe latex, and other valuable natural products. These traders would have processed the aloe on site, cutting leaves to drain the bitter yellow latex, concentrating it through evaporation or boiling, then packaging it for transport to markets in Egypt, Arabia, and beyond. The trade persisted for millennia, creating economic connections between Socotra and distant civilizations long before modern globalization. References to Socotra aloe appear in classical Greek and Roman texts, where it was valued as a medicinal substance worth the considerable expense and risk of long-distance maritime trade. The island's isolation and the valued products it offered meant that for much of human history, Socotra was known primarily through trade goods rather than direct experience. Most people who used Socotran aloe or dragon's blood never saw the island itself, knew nothing of its endemic plants or limestone plateaus, understood it only as a distant source of valuable substances brought by traders from across the Indian Ocean. Archaeological evidence shows human settlement on Socotra dating to at least 1,000 years before the Common Era, with pottery fragments indicating contact with South Arabian civilizations that flourished in what is now Yemen and Oman. These early inhabitants likely arrived by boat from the Arabian Peninsula, bringing with them domesticated animals, agricultural knowledge, and cultural practices from their mainland origins. The pottery fragments found in coastal middens show stylistic similarities to ceramics produced in South Arabian kingdoms, evidence of ongoing contact and exchange even after initial settlement. The settlers would have faced significant challenges adapting to Socotra's environment. The seasonal monsoon isolation meant they needed to establish self-sufficient communities capable of surviving months without outside contact. The harsh climate and poor soils limited agricultural potential, and the island's endemic species would have been unfamiliar and not always useful for human purposes. Yet they persisted, gradually developing the distinctively Socotri culture that exists today. A culture shaped by isolation, but never completely cut off from broader Indian Ocean networks of trade and exchange. The archaeological record remains incomplete, but the evidence suggests continuous human presence on Socotra for at least 3 millennia, communities adapting their lifeways to the island's constraints while maintaining enough connection to the outside world to acquire goods and ideas they could not produce locally. The island's name possibly derives from Sanskrit Dvapa Sukadara, meaning island of bliss, suggesting Indian Ocean traders' familiarity with this remote landfall and perhaps their appreciation for its value as a waypoint during long maritime journeys. The Sanskrit etymology, though debated by scholars, makes geographic and historical sense. Indian traders sailing westward toward Africa and Arabia would have passed near Socotra, and the island would have offered valuable opportunities to replenish water supplies, shelter from storms, and collect trade goods like dragon's blood and frankincense. The name Island of Bliss might reflect the relief sailors felt upon reaching Socotra after long ocean passages, or it might refer to the island's valued natural products that brought wealth to those who collected and traded them. Alternative etymologies connect the name to South Arabian languages or to Greek sources that called the island Dioscorides, but the Sanskrit connection remains plausible given the extensive trade networks that linked the Indian subcontinent with Eastern Africa and Arabia during the classical period. Whatever its true origin, the name has passed through multiple languages and pronunciations over millennia, eventually becoming the Socotra we use today, a name that carries echoes of ancient trade routes and the multinational character of Indian Ocean maritime culture. Socotra's capital, Hadibo, sits on the northern coastal plain where 40,000 of the island's 60,000 inhabitants live in a town without traffic lights, its streets arranged in organic patterns that follow the contours of the land rather than imposed grid systems. Hadibo grew from a small fishing settlement into the island's urban center only in recent decades, as modernization and improved access brought more people from the dispersed rural areas to the coastal capital. The town remains modest by mainland standards, low buildings constructed from concrete blocks or coral stone, shops selling basic goods, a small market where fishermen bring their daily catch, a few government offices conducting the minimal bureaucracy required to administer this remote island. The absence of traffic lights reflects the minimal vehicular traffic. A few dozen cars and trucks navigate roads shared with pedestrians, goats, and the occasional donkey, moving slowly through streets where everyone seems to know everyone else. Life in Hadibo maintains a pace determined more by traditional rhythms than modern schedules, the day's activities shaped by fishing opportunities, the heat of midday, the social obligations of family and community. Despite its status as capital, Hadibo retains a village-like character, a place where the arrival of the weekly boat from the mainland remains a significant event, where news spreads through face-to-face conversation rather than digital networks, where many inhabitants maintain close connections to rural areas and the traditional pastoralist lifestyle of the interior plateau. The plateau region remains so sparsely populated that families live 20 kilometers apart, herding goats through valleys where mobile phone signals never reach, and the nearest neighbor requires hours of walking across rocky terrain to visit. These highland pastoralist families represent the traditional Socotra lifestyle that persisted for centuries before coastal urbanization began drawing people toward Hadibo. Their lives follow patterns shaped by Socotra's seasonal cycles. During winter months, when rains bring temporary water to wadis and highland valleys, they range widely with their herds, moving to take advantage of fresh vegetation that emerges after the first rains. During summer drought, they concentrate around permanent springs and caves where water persists, rationing resources carefully through the long months when temperatures soar and vegetation dries to brittle stubble. The isolation is profound. Families may go weeks without seeing anyone outside their immediate household, their world bounded by the familiar valleys and peaks they've known since childhood, their knowledge of the landscape intimate and detailed in ways impossible for outsiders to appreciate. They navigate by landmarks invisible to untrained eyes, know which caves contain water late in the dry season, understand which plants indicate underground moisture, can predict weather changes from cloud formations and wind patterns. This knowledge, accumulated over generations and passed from parents to children, represents an encyclopedic understanding of Socotra's environment, practical wisdom, without which survival in the interior would be nearly impossible. Socotra's goats have adapted to browse on dragon's blood tree saplings, creating conservation challenges as overgrazing prevents forest regeneration in some areas where adult trees stand without younger replacements growing beneath them. The goats, introduced by humans centuries ago, found an island with few natural predators and abundant browse in the form of endemic plants that had never evolved defenses against mammalian herbivores. Dragon's blood tree seedlings and saplings prove particularly vulnerable. Their soft bark and succulent growing tips are readily consumed by goats, which can prevent young trees from reaching heights beyond browsing range. In areas with high goat densities, dragon's blood forests show clear age structure problems, many mature trees, some young seedlings that germinate after each rainy season, but few intermediate-aged saplings that have survived long enough to escape goat browsing and grow into replacement trees. This creates a demographic crisis, as the ancient mature trees eventually die from age or storm damage. No younger generation exists to replace them, and the forest slowly declines. Conservation efforts focus on reducing goat populations in critical areas and protecting seedlings behind fences or in enclosures where they can grow safely beyond browsing height. The challenge lies in balancing conservation goals with the economic needs of Socotra pastoralists for whom goats provide milk, meat, and livelihood. Eliminating goats entirely would devastate rural livelihoods, but allowing unrestricted grazing threatens the endemic forests that make Socotra globally significant. Finding sustainable middle ground requires cooperation between conservation organizations, government authorities, and local communities, negotiations complicated by limited resources and the real economic pressures facing island residents. Traditional Socotra houses use limestone blocks and palm wood, their thick walls providing insulation against summer heat that exceeds 40 degrees Celsius on the coastal plains, while remaining relatively comfortable inside even without air conditioning. The construction method evolved over centuries of trial and refinement, producing buildings well adapted to Socotra's climate extremes. Limestone for walls comes from nearby outcrops, cut into blocks using simple tools, the stone's thermal mass absorbing heat during the day and releasing it slowly at night, moderating interior temperature swings. Palm wood, harvested from date palms, provides structural support for roofs and doors, the wood being one of the few timber resources available on an island where large trees are rare and mostly protected. Roofs are often flat or gently sloped, built from palm fronds or corrugated metal, sometimes plastered with mud and straw that provides additional insulation. Windows remain small and strategically placed to allow ventilation while minimizing direct sunlight entering the interior. The thick walls, often 40 centimeters or more in thickness, create deep window recesses that shade the openings even when sun angles are high. These traditional houses require no electricity for cooling. Their design, achieving thermal comfort through passive means that modern concrete block construction often fails to match. Inside, the rooms remain dim and cool even at midday, the thick stone walls creating cave-like conditions that make the blazing heat outside feel distant and unreal. The island's southern coast faces the open Indian Ocean, where cliffs drop directly into water 1,000 meters deep, creating conditions too dangerous for harbors or settlements where waves arrive with undiminished force after crossing thousands of kilometers of open ocean. The southern coastline remains the most remote and least accessible part of Socotra, its cliffs rising abruptly from the sea without any gradual coastal plain or protective offshore reefs to moderate wave energy. During the southwest monsoon, waves crash against these cliffs with tremendous force, spray rising tens of meters into the air, the sound of wave impact audible from the plateau above. Even during calmer seasons, the southern coast remains treacherous. Deep water immediately offshore means large waves maintain their energy right up to the cliff base. Currents flow unpredictably around rocky promontories, and landing points simply do not exist along most of the coastline. This has protected the southern portion of Socotra from human impact. No roads lead to many sections of the coast. No settlements mar the cliff tops. The landscape remains as wild and untouched as any place in the Indian Ocean. The cliffs themselves reveal Socotra's geology dramatically. Horizontal limestone layers exposed in vertical section, each stratum representing a different period of ancient reef growth. The layers tilted slightly by tectonic forces, their edges eroding differentially as harder and softer layers weather at different rates. These southern cliffs host nesting colonies of Egyptian vultures that soar on thermal updrafts created by winds striking the limestone walls, riding rising air currents with minimal wing movement as they search for carrion across the island's interior. The Egyptian vulture, despite its name, ranges widely across Africa, southern Europe, and Asia, but Socotra's population represents one of the healthiest remaining colonies in the Indian Ocean region. The birds nest on cliff ledges inaccessible to ground predators, constructing bulky platforms of sticks lined with softer materials where they lay their eggs in spring. The chicks fledge during early summer, learning to exploit the reliable updrafts along the southern cliffs before gradually expanding their range across the entire island. The vultures feed primarily on carrion, dead goats, fish washed ashore, occasionally the carcasses of sea turtles or marine mammals. Their role as scavengers provides essential ecosystem services, removing dead animals that might otherwise harbor diseases or attract less desirable scavengers. The birds' white plumage and distinctive yellow face make them unmistakable in flight. Their silhouettes, circling high above the plateau as they scan the landscape below for feeding opportunities, their presence adding a sense of wildness to Socotra's already remote character. During winter months from October to March, Socotra's climate moderates to 25 degrees Celsius, when brief rains transform the plateau into carpets of wildflowers that emerge from dormant seeds waiting in the soil through the long summer drought. This seasonal transformation occurs rapidly, sometimes within days of the first substantial rainfall. Seeds that have lain dormant for 8 months suddenly germinate, their internal chemistry triggered by moisture and cooler temperatures that signal favorable growing conditions. The flowers that emerge belong primarily to annual species that must complete their entire life cycle in the brief window between winter rains and the return of summer heat. They grow quickly, racing through germination, vegetative growth, flowering, and seed production in just 6 to 8 weeks. The plateau becomes temporarily colorful with blooms in yellows, purples, and whites, modest flowers mostly, not the showy blossoms of temperate gardens but delicate species, adapted to make the most of limited resources. Insects emerge in similar profusion. Butterflies and bees that remained dormant as pupae or eggs through the dry months, now active and urgently pursuing their own compressed life cycles. The transformation feels almost miraculous after the months of brown dormancy. The same landscape that appeared lifeless, suddenly teeming with growth and activity, proving that dormancy is not death but merely patience. Life waiting for conditions to improve before expending precious energy on growth and reproduction. The island's freshwater caves contain underground pools where endemic blind fish, Gara baremii, navigate in complete darkness using lateral line sensors that detect pressure waves and water movements in their lightless environment. These fish represent one of Socotra's most remarkable evolutionary adaptations, animals that descended from surface-dwelling ancestors but became trapped in underground water systems where they gradually lost their eyes over countless generations. Natural selection, favoring individuals that invested biological resources in sensory systems useful in darkness rather than vision that served no purpose in perpetual night. The blind fish appear ghostly, their bodies pale or translucent, lacking the pigmentation that fish in sunlit waters require for protection from ultraviolet radiation. They move through the underground pools with surprising confidence, navigating by sensing minute pressure changes in the water created by their own swimming motion, reflecting off cave walls and obstacles. The lateral line system, a series of sensory organs along each side of the fish's body, provides a kind of tactile sense at a distance, allowing the fish to build a mental map of their surroundings based on hydrodynamic information. These fish feed on organic matter that washes into the caves from the surface, dissolved nutrients, bacteria, small invertebrates, surviving on the meager energy subsidies that connect the cave ecosystem to the sunlit world above. Their presence demonstrates that life finds pathways even into the most unlikely environments, that evolution solves the problems presented by darkness and isolation through patient modification across generations. Socotra's Momi Plateau in the island's northeast rises to 900 meters, where ancient juniper trees grow twisted by constant winds into shapes resembling frozen dancers, their trunks contorted and branches swept into permanent curves that record decades of exposure to prevailing monsoon winds. These junipers represent another of Socotra's endemic woody species, trees that grow slowly in the harsh highland environment, adding perhaps a few centimeters of growth each year under favorable conditions, sometimes adding no growth at all during particularly harsh years. The wind sculpting creates natural bonsai on a large scale, trees that might grow straight and tall in protected locations forced by wind pressure into low, spreading forms that minimize wind resistance. The most extreme examples grow almost horizontally, their main trunks running parallel to the ground, while branches extend only on the leeward side, creating flag-form trees that unmistakably indicate wind direction. The wood itself becomes incredibly dense and hard through slow growth, the annual rings compressed tightly together, creating timber that resists rot and insect damage. Traditional Socotri people valued juniper wood for construction and tool-making, though harvesting was limited by the tree's slow growth and protected status in many areas. The Momi Plateau, where these trees concentrate, receives slightly more moisture than surrounding lowlands. Fog and rain carried by winds that strike the plateau's elevated position, providing just enough additional water to allow the junipers to persist in an otherwise marginal environment. The Socotran pomegranate, Punica protopunica, represents a separate species from mainland pomegranates, its pink flowers appearing before the bitter fruit that locals rarely consume. The plant valued more for its ornamental presence and botanical uniqueness than any practical use. This endemic pomegranate diverged from its mainland relatives millions of years ago, evolving in isolation until it became genetically and morphologically distinct enough to be classified as a separate species. The flowers emerge during late winter, appearing directly on branches before leaves fully develop, their delicate pink petals creating splashes of color against the plant's gray bark. The fruit that follows ripens during summer, smaller than commercial pomegranates and containing compounds that make them astringently bitter rather than sweet. The bitterness likely evolved as a defense against herbivores, though it renders the fruit unpalatable to humans as well, meaning that unlike its cultivated mainland relative, the Socotran pomegranate never became an important food crop. The plants grow scattered across the island's highlands, particularly in rocky areas with good drainage, their presence adding to the botanical diversity that makes Socotra remarkable. For botanists, Punica protopunica represents a fascinating evolutionary case study, a close relative of a familiar cultivated plant that took a different evolutionary path in isolation, demonstrating how separation and different selection pressures can drive related populations toward distinct forms. Socotra's date palms grow in wadis, where seasonal streams flow, their cultivation providing the island's primary agricultural crop besides fishing. The palms concentrated in valleys where underground water persists through the dry season, even after surface flow disappears. Date palms represent one of the few successful agricultural introductions to Socotra, brought by early settlers from the Arabian Peninsula, where date cultivation had been practiced for millennia. The palms thrive in Socotra's wadi bottoms, where their roots can access groundwater tables that remain relatively stable even during extended drought. Each palm requires regular moisture to produce good fruit crops, but mature trees can survive surprising water stress once established, their roots extending deep into wadi sediments to tap moisture unavailable to shallower-rooted plants. The dates produced on Socotra tend to be smaller and less sweet than premium varieties from the Arabian Peninsula or North Africa, the island's climate and soils creating growing conditions that limit fruit quality, but they nonetheless provide important nutrition and calories for Socotri people. The palms also provide wood for construction, their trunks valued as structural elements in traditional houses, and their fronds used for roofing material and basketry. In a landscape where large trees are rare and mostly protected, date palms represent one of the few renewable sources of substantial timber. The cultivation is not intensive. Palms grow in somewhat haphazard groves rather than carefully managed plantations, receiving minimal care beyond occasional irrigation during critical growth periods, their hardiness making them well-suited to Socotra's resource-limited agricultural system. The island's isolation created 14 endemic land snail species, including ones with shells so thin they appear translucent when held to sunlight. Their calcium carbonate structures reduced to the minimum necessary for protection in an environment where the energetic cost of shell building must be balanced against available calcium and food resources. These land snails represent another example of island evolution producing unusual forms, mollusks that arrived on Socotra sometime in the distant past, perhaps carried as eggs on birds' feet or floating on vegetation rafts, then diversifying into multiple species as populations adapted to different microhabitats across the island. The thin-shelled varieties inhabit caves and protected rock crevices where they face minimal risk from shell-crushing predators, allowing them to invest less calcium in structural protection and more resources in growth and reproduction. When you hold one of these shells up to light, you can sometimes see the internal organs through the translucent spiral, the snail's body visible as shadow within its minimal home. The snails remain active primarily during humid periods, after rains, during foggy mornings in the highlands, in the cool dampness of caves, emerging to feed on algae, lichens, and decomposing plant matter. During dry periods, they retreat into crevices and seal their shell openings with dried mucus, entering dormancy that can last months until moisture returns. Their slow movement and low metabolic rates suit them perfectly to Socotra's harsh environment, where patience and efficiency determine survival more than speed or competitive ability. Socotra's skinks include 6 endemic reptile species that hunt insects in the cool hours before dawn, when dew briefly moistens the limestone and invertebrate prey becomes more active after the relative coolness of night. These small lizards, most less than 15 centimeters in total length, have evolved distinctive characteristics that separate them from their mainland relatives. Some species show reduced limbs, their legs shorter than expected for their body size, an adaptation toward more snake-like movement through rock crevices and loose soil. Others display unusual color patterns, their scales patterned in browns and grays that provide camouflage against Socotra's limestone substrate. The dawn hunting period represents a narrow window of optimal conditions, warm enough that the cold-blooded lizards can move efficiently, but not yet so hot that they must seek shade to avoid overheating, while dew and cooler temperatures bring insects to surfaces where skinks can capture them. The lizards themselves become prey for larger predators, including endemic birds and the occasional snake, fitting into food webs that connect insects to reptiles, to birds in the endless cycling of energy through ecosystems. Their endemism reflects the same isolation that produced Socotra's endemic plants and birds. Separation over millions of years, allowing populations to diverge genetically until they became distinct species, forms shaped by the specific selective pressures of island life. The island experiences almost no twilight due to its proximity to the equator at 12 degrees north latitude, where darkness arrives within 20 minutes of sunset year-round, the sun dropping below the horizon, and night following almost immediately, without the extended dusk that characterizes higher latitudes. This rapid transition from day to night results from the sun's path across the sky at equatorial latitudes. Rather than setting at a shallow angle that produces long twilight, the sun drops nearly perpendicular to the horizon, disappearing quickly below the edge of the world. The effect can feel abrupt for visitors accustomed to temperate zones where summer twilight can last over an hour. On Socotra, the brilliant daylight fades to darkness in the time it takes to prepare an evening meal, the stars emerging suddenly in a sky that only minutes before blazed with afternoon sun. This daily rhythm of rapid transitions shapes life on the island in subtle ways. There is little time for leisurely evening activities before darkness makes outdoor work difficult. Traditional schedules organized around maximizing productive hours during daylight rather than extending activities into twilight. The rapid nightfall also makes Socotra's stars particularly impressive, without the gradual dimming that allows eyes to slowly adapt. The transition from daylight to starlight feels dramatic. The Milky Way suddenly visible as a luminous band across the sky. More stars than seem possible crowding the darkness above an island, where artificial lights remain sparse and concentrated in coastal settlements. Ancient Greek sailors called Socotra Dioscorides, after the island appeared in geographic texts by Ptolemy in the 1st century of the Common Era. These classical references, providing some of the earliest written documentation of the island's existence and its importance in Indian Ocean trade networks. Ptolemy's geography included Dioscorides in its catalogue of known lands, placing it approximately correctly in the Indian Ocean east of Africa, though the precise coordinates and descriptions contained the inaccuracies typical of ancient cartography based on sailors' reports rather than systematic surveying. The name Dioscorides may have derived from a Greek or Hellenized rendering of an earlier name, though its exact etymology remains uncertain. Greek and Roman merchants knew of Socotra primarily through the valuable products that came from there: dragon's blood resin, aloe, and other materials that reached Mediterranean markets through complex chains of middlemen traders who sailed between India, Arabia, and Africa. Few Greeks or Romans likely visited Socotra directly, the island remaining a distant source of exotic goods rather than a destination for classical exploration. The references in Ptolemy and other ancient texts nonetheless demonstrate that Socotra's reputation extended far beyond the Indian Ocean, that its products and location were known even in the Mediterranean world, making this remote island a small but recognized part of the interconnected trade networks that spanned from Europe to India during the classical period. Medieval Arab geographers described Socotra as the source of dragon's blood, aloe, and ambergris, making it a legendary destination for natural resources that commanded high prices in markets from Cairo to Baghdad to the trading cities of the Indian Ocean Rim. The Arab geographers, writing in Arabic during the Islamic Golden Age, produced increasingly accurate descriptions of Socotra, based on accounts from sailors and merchants who regularly visited the island as part of their Indian Ocean trading voyages. These texts described Socotra's products in detail: the red resin obtained from dragon's blood trees, used in medicine and as a dye, the bitter latex from aloe plants, valued as a purgative and healing agent, and occasionally ambergris washed ashore from sperm whales, a substance worth its weight in gold for use in perfumery. The inclusion of ambergris in lists of Socotran products reflects either occasional finds on the island's beaches or confusion about the sources of various rare substances, since ambergris comes from whales rather than being produced by any land-based organism. Nonetheless, the medieval descriptions helped cement Socotra's reputation as a place of valuable and mysterious natural products, contributing to the island's almost mythical status in pre-modern geographic imagination. For medieval merchants, Socotra represented opportunity, a place where valuable goods could be obtained relatively cheaply and transported to distant markets where they commanded premium prices, the long voyage and seasonal limitations adding to the romance and profitability of the Socotra trade. The island's endemic legume trees, including Acacia pennsylvania, fix nitrogen in poor limestone soils, creating nutrient islands that support communities of other endemic plants that benefit from the improved soil conditions beneath and around the nitrogen-fixing trees. Nitrogen fixation represents one of nature's most important processes. Certain plants form symbiotic relationships with soil bacteria that can convert atmospheric nitrogen into biologically available forms that plants can use for growth. Most plants cannot access the abundant nitrogen in the atmosphere and must instead obtain it from soil in the form of nitrates or ammonium compounds. On Socotra, where limestone soils are naturally poor in nutrients and organic matter, Nitrogen-fixing legumes play a crucial role in ecosystem function by increasing nitrogen availability in their immediate vicinity. The tree's roots host nodules containing nitrogen-fixing bacteria. These microscopic organisms receiving carbohydrates from the tree while providing fixed nitrogen in return. A mutually beneficial exchange that allows both partners to thrive in nutrient-poor conditions. When leaves fall from the legume trees and decompose, they release accumulated nitrogen into the soil, where other plants can access it. Similarly, root turnover and dieback continuously adds nitrogen below ground. The result is that soil beneath and around nitrogen-fixing trees becomes enriched relative to the surrounding nutrient-poor substrate, creating patches of enhanced fertility where other plants grow more vigorously, producing the nutrient island effect that shapes plant community structure across Socotra's landscape. Socotra's bottle trees, Dorstenia gigas, grow from cliff faces where their succulent trunks expand and contract with water availability, sometimes living 200 years in positions that seem to defy gravity and all reasonable expectations of where trees should be able to survive. These remarkable plants belong to the fig family, but have evolved into forms bearing little resemblance to typical figs. The trunk appears grotesquely swollen, storing water in succulent tissues that allow the plant to survive months without rainfall. The trunk surface smooth and pale green with photosynthetic capacity that supplements the small leaves that appear primarily during the brief, favorable seasons. The bottle trees grow from vertical rock faces or steep slopes where they anchor themselves with roots that penetrate into cracks and fissures. The root system serving both to anchor the plant against gravity and to access moisture that seeps through the porous limestone. The trunk's ability to expand and contract allows the plant to respond to water availability. After rains, the trunk swells noticeably as tissues absorb and store water, then gradually contracts during drought as stored reserves are consumed. The plant's longevity is remarkable, given its precarious positions. 2 centuries of existence while clinging to cliff faces exposed to wind, sun, and the occasional violent storm, the slow accumulation of growth rings, recording 200 wet seasons and 200 droughts, 200 expansions and contractions of the succulent tissues, survival through patient endurance rather than competitive vigor. The island's rocky shores host tide pools, where endemic crabs and shrimp species have adapted to extreme temperature fluctuations of 20 degrees between high and low tide. These intertidal organisms experiencing environmental conditions that shift dramatically twice each day as lunar cycles drive water levels up and down the shoreline. At high tide, the pools are submerged beneath ocean water, temperatures moderated by the vast thermal mass of the sea, salinity matching normal seawater, wave action bringing fresh oxygen and nutrients. As the tide recedes, the pools become isolated, small volumes of water trapped in limestone depressions where conditions begin changing immediately. Under the tropical sun, water temperature can rise 15 or 20 degrees within a few hours, while evaporation increases salinity as pure water evaporates, leaving dissolved salts behind. Oxygen levels may drop if the pool contains substantial organic matter, whose decomposition consumes dissolved oxygen faster than diffusion from the atmosphere can replace it. The endemic crabs and shrimp that inhabit these pools have evolved remarkable physiological tolerances. They can function across wide temperature ranges, tolerate salinity that varies from normal seawater to highly concentrated brine, and survive in low oxygen conditions that would kill less adapted species. Their adaptations represent fine-tuning across generations to match the specific conditions of Socotra's intertidal zone, evolutionary solutions to environmental challenges that occur nowhere else in exactly the same combination. Socotra's few permanent streams originate in the Hagihar Mountains, flowing only after winter rains and disappearing underground before reaching the coast, the water percolating through porous limestone rather than flowing on the surface all the way to the ocean. These ephemeral streams come alive during and immediately after substantial rainfall, water collecting in high elevation watersheds and flowing downslope through wadis and valleys, creating temporary rivers that can run knee-deep or deeper for days or weeks following major rain events. As the stream courses descend toward lower elevations, the water gradually disappears, sinking into the stream bed where it percolates downward through sediments and fractured limestone into underground aquifers. The vanishing act occurs progressively. The uppermost reaches may still be flowing while lower sections have already dried, the stream ending in an arbitrary point where infiltration capacity matches inflow, creating a terminus that migrates upstream as the water supply diminishes. Eventually, the entire surface flow disappears, leaving only damp sand in the wadi bottom. Then even that moisture disappears as the last water either evaporates or sinks completely underground. The water doesn't vanish entirely. It continues flowing through subsurface passages and pore spaces in the limestone, moving slowly toward the ocean through pathways invisible from the surface, sometimes emerging briefly as springs where impermeable rock layers force groundwater back to the surface before it sinks again and continues its hidden journey. The Rouge Marine Protected Area on the southeastern coast protects mangrove stands where gray herons and reef egrets hunt in shallow channels that thread between the mangrove roots during high tide, the birds wading through water that retreats and reveals mud flats at low tide, their feeding opportunities shifting with the tidal cycle. Mangroves represent the intersection of land and sea, trees adapted to grow with their roots submerged in salt water, tolerating conditions that would kill most terrestrial plants. The Rouge mangroves belong to species that range widely around the Indian Ocean, not endemic to Socotra, but still ecologically important as the island's only significant coastal wetland. The mangrove roots create complex three-dimensional habitat underwater, their branching structures providing shelter for juvenile fish, crabs, and other marine organisms that use the protected channels as nursery habitat before migrating to coral reefs or open ocean as they mature. The herons and egrets patrol these channels methodically, their long legs allowing them to wade in water too deep for smaller birds, their sharp beaks striking quickly when they spot fish or crustaceans moving through the murky water. The bird's presence adds to the mangrove's ecological complexity. They bring nutrients from the marine environment onto land through their droppings, connecting the ocean and terrestrial ecosystems in cycles of energy and nutrient flow that sustain both. These mangroves represent Socotra's only significant coastal wetland, providing nursery habitat for 40 species of juvenile fish that depend on the protected, food-rich environment during their vulnerable early life stages before they grow large enough to survive in more exposed habitats. The mangrove's value to fisheries extends far beyond their modest spatial extent. Many of the commercially important fish species caught by Socotri fishermen likely spent their juvenile stages in mangrove channels, growing on the abundant small prey animals that thrive in the organic-rich sediments and sheltered waters. Without mangrove nurseries, reef fish populations would likely decline significantly, as juveniles attempting to settle directly onto coral reefs would face much higher predation rates without the intermediate protected habitat where they can grow before facing full exposure to reef predators. The mangroves thus function as a critical link in coastal food webs, their protection essential not just for conservation values, but for maintaining the fisheries that support coastal communities. The Ruche Marine Protected Area recognizes this importance, implementing restrictions on development and destructive activities that could damage the mangroves, attempting to balance human use with ecological preservation in a landscape where both conservation and livelihood needs remain pressing. The island's endemic fig species, Ficus vasta, grows in wadi bottoms where its roots access groundwater 20 meters below the surface during summer drought, the tree capable of surviving months without rainfall by tapping into subterranean water reserves that persist long after surface moisture has completely disappeared. Fig trees worldwide are known for their ability to send roots deep in search of water. But Ficus vasta's root systems represent extreme adaptations to Socotra's harsh water scarcity. The roots grow downward through wadi sediments and fractured limestone, following moisture gradients until they reach the water table, where groundwater slowly flows through subsurface passages toward the coast. Once established, these deep roots provide reliable water access that allows the tree to maintain some degree of photosynthetic activity even during the driest months, when surrounding vegetation has gone completely dormant or died back to underground structures. The fig trees grow large by Socotra standards, substantial trunks and spreading canopies that provide islands of shade in the otherwise sparse wadi vegetation. Birds and bats feed on the figs when they ripen, dispersing seeds in their droppings and contributing to the tree's reproduction. The presence of large fig trees in wadi bottoms creates habitat and resources for numerous other species. Their shade moderates temperature. Their dropped leaves contribute organic matter to soil. Their trunks provide nesting sites for birds. Their canopies offer perches for raptors surveying the landscape for prey. Socotra's granite intrusions, visible at several locations, represent volcanic magma that cooled underground 50 million years ago and later became exposed by erosion as overlying limestone and other rocks wore away over millions of years. These granite outcrops appear as dramatic contrasts to the prevailing limestone. Dark, crystalline rock, harder and more resistant to erosion than the sedimentary limestone surrounding it, creating prominent landmarks and high points in the topography. The granite formed during a period of volcanic activity associated with the tectonic processes that were pulling Africa and Arabia apart, magma rising from the Earth's mantle and intruding into the overlying sedimentary rocks. The magma cooled slowly underground, allowing large crystals to form, creating the coarse-grained texture characteristic of granite. At the time of intrusion, the granite sat perhaps kilometers below the surface, its presence invisible to any observer on the ancient landscape above. Only through millions of years of erosion, the limestone gradually wearing away grain by grain, did the granite eventually become exposed, its greater hardness causing it to stand as hills or ridges, while softer rocks around it eroded to lower elevations. The granite intrusions add geological diversity to Socotra, creating different soil types and microclimates where they outcrop, their darker color absorbing more solar radiation and creating locally warmer conditions, their mineral composition weathering to produce soils chemically distinct from those derived from limestone. The island's sea caves, accessible only at low tide, contain pools where endemic shrimp species have evolved in isolated saltwater ecosystems cut off from the open ocean for most of each tidal cycle, creating environments that function as islands within islands, marine organisms living in restricted populations that experience genetic isolation, similar to terrestrial species on oceanic islands. These sea caves form where wave action has eroded softer limestone layers or where underground passages partially collapsed, creating chambers at or near sea level that flood during high tide and become accessible during low tide. The water trapped in pools within these caves during low tide experiences different conditions than the open ocean. Reduced water circulation, limited food input except what washes in during high tides, potential temperature and salinity fluctuations as solar heating warms shallow pools, or evaporation concentrates dissolved salts. The endemic shrimp species that inhabit these pools have adapted to conditions found nowhere else. Their populations so small and isolated that genetic drift and natural selection can work quickly to produce distinctive forms. Some of these shrimp show unusual characteristics: reduced pigmentation compared to their oceanic relatives, modified appendages adapted for life in still pools rather than current-swept reefs, behavioral changes that suit them to their confined environment. Their discovery and study came relatively recently, many of Socotra's endemic marine species only being documented in the past few decades as scientists began systematic surveys of the island's coastal caves and tide pools. Socotra's fishermen use traditional wooden boats without engines, sailing to fishing grounds up to 40 kilometers offshore, where tuna and kingfish migrate through Indian Ocean currents, following patterns that Socotri sailors have learned through generations of accumulated knowledge passed down through families and communities. These boats, built from imported timber, since Socotra lacks suitable trees for shipbuilding, follow designs refined over centuries to balance sailing performance with the practical needs of fishing operations. The hulls are narrow and deep, allowing them to sail efficiently to windward, essential when working against monsoon winds. A single mast carries a triangular lateen sail that can be adjusted to catch wind from various angles, the sail configuration allowing boats to sail remarkably close to the wind when needed. Without engines, fishermen depend entirely on wind and current, their skill in reading weather signs and ocean conditions determining their safety and success. They navigate by observing bird behavior, water color, wave patterns, and when out of sight of land, by the positions of sun and stars. Practical navigational skills that predate modern GPS systems by millennia. The fishing grounds they seek lie along current boundaries and seamounts where upwelling brings nutrients to the surface, concentrating plankton and attracting the small fish that in turn attract the tuna and kingfish that Socotri fishermen seek. A successful fishing trip might yield dozens of substantial fish, enough to feed families and sell surplus in Hadibo's market, though unsuccessful trips yielding nothing but expended effort and time are also common. The uncertainty inherent in fishing from sail-powered boats in waters that don't always cooperate with human schedules and needs. The island's plateau experiences temperature inversions during winter nights when cold air settles in valleys, creating frost at elevations above 1,000 meters where temperatures occasionally drop below freezing despite Socotra's tropical latitude. This phenomenon occurs on clear, calm nights when the ground radiates heat away to space without cloud cover to trap warmth near the surface. The air in contact with the cooling ground loses heat through conduction, becoming denser and heavier than the warmer air above. On sloping terrain, this cold, dense air drains downward like an invisible liquid, flowing into valleys and depressions where it pools, creating pockets of surprisingly cold air in low-lying areas, while hilltops remain relatively warm. The effect reverses the normal temperature pattern where elevation correlates with cooler conditions. During strong inversions, valleys become colder than peaks, frost forming in the hollows, while slopes above remain frost-free. For Socotra's endemic plants, these frost events represent rare but significant stresses, brief periods of freezing that test the cold tolerance of species that otherwise experience only warmth. Some plants have adapted to tolerate occasional frost, their cellular structures able to survive ice crystal formation without fatal damage, while others survive only by growing in positions protected from the coldest air drainage. The inversions typically break up after sunrise, warm air beginning to mix vertically as solar heating warms the ground, and convection currents develop, the cold pools gradually dissipating as the day progresses toward the more typical warmth of tropical latitudes. This rare frost allows certain plants to exist at elevations where they would normally perish from summer heat, creating unexpected plant communities where cold-adapted and heat-adapted species coexist in ways impossible without the thermal complexity that inversion-driven frost creates. The frost provides a cooling effect that carries into soil temperatures and moisture retention patterns, creating microhabitats where plants with different climatic requirements can grow within meters of each other. Species that might typically require cooler climates can survive Socotra's summer heat if positioned in locations that receive winter frost, the seasonal cold somehow fulfilling requirements that allow them to persist through the harsh warm season. Conversely, some tropical species that cannot tolerate frost must avoid the valley bottoms where cold air pools, restricting themselves to slopes and hilltops where inversions keep temperatures above freezing. This creates a complex mosaic of microclimates distributed across the landscape in patterns determined by subtle topographic variations, slight depressions that trap cold air, gentle slopes where air drainage prevents pooling, ridges that rise above the inversion layer. The resulting plant distributions appear almost random to casual observers, but reflect precise relationships between topography, temperature patterns, and species' physiological tolerances, natural communities assembled according to rules written in nighttime physics and evolutionary adaptation. Socotra's endemic scorpion species, including Nebo socotrensis, hunt at night using sensory organs that detect vibrations from insect prey moving across sand or rock surfaces, their bodies equipped with specialized hairs and organs sensitive to minute substrate movements that reveal prey, location, even in complete darkness. These scorpions exemplify adaptations for nocturnal predation in desert environments. They remain concealed during daylight hours, hiding under rocks or in shallow burrows where they escape the scorching sun, emerging only after darkness falls and temperatures moderate to more comfortable levels. The vibration-sensing organs work on principles similar to seismographs, detecting compressions and distortions of the substrate caused by insects walking nearby, the scorpion's nervous system processing these signals to determine prey direction and distance. When prey approaches within striking range, the scorpion moves with surprising speed, its pedipalps grasping the victim, while the tail arcs forward to deliver venom through the sharp stinger at its tip. The venom paralyzes prey quickly, allowing the scorpion to feed safely on insects that might otherwise escape or inflict defensive injuries. Socotra's scorpions pose minimal threat to humans. Their venom evolved to subdue insects rather than large mammals, and they generally avoid human contact. Their nocturnal habits and secretive nature, meaning most visitors to the island never see them despite their presence across many habitats. For those who do encounter them, usually by accidentally disturbing their hiding places, the scorpions typically flee rather than attack, their stings reserved for prey and only rarely used in defense. The island's sand dunes at Arher Beach migrate inland up to 10 meters annually, driven by summer monsoon winds that reshape the eastern coastline through relentless grain-by-grain transport of sand from beach to interior, the dunes slowly advancing across the coastal plain in mobile waves of sand that bury whatever vegetation or structures lie in their path. The process begins with wind lifting sand particles from the beach during periods of strong, sustained wind, the finest grains becoming airborne while larger grains saltate, bouncing along the surface in a hopping motion driven by wind force and particle collisions. The moving sand accumulates on the dune's windward slope, grains rolling or being blown upward until they reach the crest, then tumbling down the steeper lee slope, where they come to rest at the angle of repose. Through millions of individual grain movements, the entire dune slowly advances in the downwind direction, maintaining its shape while migrating across the landscape. The rate of movement depends on wind strength and sand supply. During intense monsoon periods with sustained high winds and abundant beach sand available for transport, dunes can advance several meters in a single season. The advancing dunes create a dynamic landscape where nothing remains stable. Vegetation that colonizes interdune areas, eventually being overrun by migrating sand, exposing new bare sand surfaces behind the dune while burying older surfaces ahead of it. The coastal environment in constant flux driven by wind and sand. These dunes sometimes reveal ancient pottery and shell middens, archaeological layers documenting 3,000 years of coastal habitation, becoming briefly exposed before being reburied under continuing dune migration, offering tantalizing glimpses into Socotra's human past before the evidence disappears once more beneath the sand. The middens, accumulations of discarded shells from mollusks consumed by ancient inhabitants, appear as dark layers rich in organic matter and calcium carbonate, distinct from the clean beach sand surrounding them. Pottery fragments emerge from these layers, ceramic pieces broken centuries ago now scattered across deflation surfaces where wind has temporarily removed overlying sand. The pottery styles provide clues about trade connections and cultural affiliations. Some pieces show similarity to South Arabian ceramics, others to African styles, evidence of the maritime networks that connected Socotra to broader Indian Ocean civilizations. The archaeological sites represent rare evidence of ancient Socotri life, most material culture having disappeared through decay or been carried away by later inhabitants. Only the most durable artifacts like pottery sherds and shell accumulations surviving to the present. The intermittent exposure by dune migration creates opportunities for discovering these sites, but also threatens their preservation. Artifacts exposed by wind erosion may be scattered or destroyed before they can be properly documented, while sites that remain buried might be better preserved, but remain unknown and unstudied, hidden beneath meters of mobile sand. Socotra's endemic gecko species communicate through ultrasonic calls inaudible to humans, maintaining territories in limestone boulder fields where males advertise their presence and competitive status through vocalizations that travel through the night air at frequencies above the range of human hearing. Most gecko species worldwide are notably vocal compared to other lizards, producing clicks, chirps, and other sounds used in social communication. But Socotra's geckos have evolved calls at unusually high frequencies, perhaps to avoid overlap with sounds produced by other nocturnal animals or to exploit acoustic properties of their boulder field habitats. The ultrasonic frequencies propagate differently through air than lower frequencies, potentially carrying further or with less absorption in the warm, dry conditions of Socotra's nights. Other geckos can hear and respond to these calls, males approaching or retreating based on the status signals encoded in call structure and repetition rate. Females potentially assessing male quality through acoustic displays before selecting mates. The boulder fields where these geckos live provide ideal habitat, countless crevices offering hiding places from predators and harsh weather, rock surfaces that retain daytime heat into the evening, providing warmth that helps these cold-blooded creatures remain active, and abundant insect prey that also shelter among the boulders. The gecko's large eyes, typical of nocturnal species, allow them to see well in starlight, navigating the complex three-dimensional environment of stacked limestone blocks while hunting insects and interacting with neighbors through their silent-to-humans ultrasonic dialogues. The island's underground aquifers hold fresh water that accumulated during wetter climate periods 10,000 years ago, now slowly depleting through springs and wells as extraction rates exceed recharge from current rainfall patterns that provide insufficient water to replenish what's being removed. These aquifers formed during the late Pleistocene and early Holocene, when global climate patterns differed from today's, rainfall in the region being higher and more reliable, allowing significant groundwater accumulation in the porous limestone that underlies much of Socotra. The water percolated downward through soil and fractured rock, gradually filling the voids and pore spaces in subsurface limestone formations, creating substantial underground reservoirs. As climate shifted toward current patterns with reduced rainfall, recharge rates declined while discharge through springs and seeps continued, beginning a slow drawdown of stored water that continues today. Human extraction through dug wells and more recently drilled boreholes has accelerated the depletion, particularly around settlements, where concentrated demand exceeds local recharge capacity. The water table has dropped measurably in some areas, springs that once flowed year-round now running only after winter rains, wells requiring deeper digging to reach water that sits at progressively lower levels. The situation illustrates a common challenge in arid regions. Groundwater that appears abundant is actually fossil water, accumulated under different climatic conditions and not being replaced at rates matching current use, meaning that current extraction rates are unsustainable over long timescales, the aquifer slowly depleting like a savings account being drawn down faster than deposits are made. Traditional Socotra navigation relied on star positions and ocean swells, knowledge systems that allowed open water voyages to mainland Yemen without compasses or modern instruments, sailors reading the ocean and sky with skills developed through generations of accumulated experience and passed through oral tradition from expert navigators to apprentices. Star navigation used the same principles that guided Polynesian voyagers across the Pacific, memorizing the rising and setting points of key stars along the horizon, using these celestial markers as directional references throughout the night as different stars rose and set following the Earth's rotation. Experienced navigators knew which stars rose above which islands or coastal features, allowing them to steer toward destinations by keeping appropriate stars ahead or behind their boats. During daylight, navigators read ocean swells, the long-period waves that persist across hundreds of kilometers, maintaining consistent direction even when local wind-driven waves create surface confusion. By feeling swell direction through the boat's motion and observing swell patterns in the water's surface, skilled navigators could maintain course even without visual reference to land or celestial objects. They also observed bird flight patterns, knowing which species ranged far offshore and which remained near land, using bird behavior to judge distance to shore when approaching islands after dark. Cloud formations provided additional clues. Stationary clouds often form above islands as moist air rises over land and condenses, creating markers visible from great distances. These multiple information sources, combined with intimate knowledge of local geography, currents, and seasonal wind patterns, created a robust navigation system that worked reliably, despite lacking the technological aids that modern mariners depend upon. The island's endemic passion flower, Passiflora foetida var. Socotraensis, climbs through shrubs using tendrils, its flowers attracting the island's limited butterfly species with nectar and pollen. The plant representing a tropical family better known from American rainforests, yet somehow establishing itself on Socotra, where it evolved into a distinct endemic variety. The presence of passion flowers on Socotra puzzles biogeographers. Most Passiflora species are native to the Americas, with only a few species occurring naturally in Asia and none in Africa, making the genus's presence on this isolated Indian Ocean island geographically anomalous. The Socotran variety likely arrived through long-distance dispersal, perhaps seeds carried by migratory birds that consumed passion flower fruit in Asia, then flew to Socotra, where they deposited the seeds in their droppings. Once established, the population became isolated and gradually diverged from mainland varieties through genetic drift and selection for traits suited to Socotra's conditions, eventually becoming distinct enough to be recognized as a separate variety. The plant climbs using tendrils, modified leaves or stems that coil around branches of supporting vegetation, allowing the passion flower to grow upward toward light without investing energy in thick structural stems. The flowers display the complex structure typical of the family: multiple ranks of colorful filaments surrounding central reproductive organs. The arrangement evolved to facilitate pollination by specific insects while excluding less effective visitors. On Socotra, the butterflies that visit these flowers may not be the plant's original pollinators, but rather Socotran species that have learned to exploit this nectar source, an example of how ecological relationships can reform in new environments as species adapt to available partners. Socotra's limestone caves host populations of endemic bats that pollinate night-blooming flowers while hunting moths through the darkness. Their echolocation calls bouncing off cave walls and creating acoustic environments quite different from the open air where most insectivorous bats forage. The bats roost in caves during daylight hours, hanging from limestone ceilings in colonies that may number hundreds of individuals clustered together for warmth and social interaction. As darkness falls, they emerge in streams from cave entrances, dispersing across the island to hunt insects that become active at night. Their echolocation system, producing ultrasonic clicks and interpreting the returning echoes, allows them to navigate and hunt in complete darkness, detecting prey insects from the tiny echoes that bounce back when their calls strike flying moths or beetles. Some Socotran flowers have evolved to bloom at night, specifically to attract bat pollinators, their flowers opening after sunset and producing strong scents that help bats locate them in darkness, the flowers offering nectar in exchange for pollination services as bats move from bloom to bloom feeding. The bat's role in island ecosystems extends beyond pollination. Their nightly hunting removes vast numbers of insects. They deposit guano in caves that supports entire ecosystems of cave-dwelling invertebrates and microorganisms, and they serve as prey for the occasional owl or raptor skilled enough to catch bats in flight. The endemic status of Socotra's bat species reflects the same isolation that produced endemic plants and birds. Populations cut off from mainland relatives long enough to diverge into distinct forms through evolutionary processes operating independently on the island. The island's highest peaks remain shrouded in clouds for 150 days annually, these mists providing critical moisture for dragon's blood tree forests that depend on fog interception to supplement scarce rainfall. The trees essentially harvesting water from passing clouds that brush against the mountains without dropping rain. Fog forms when moist air is cooled below its dew point, causing water vapor to condense into tiny droplets suspended in air. When this process occurs at ground level, we experience it as fog, while at higher elevations, it appears as low clouds engulfing the peaks. Socotra's highest elevations intercept these moisture-laden air masses during winter months and occasionally during summer, when monsoonal flow brings humid air from the Indian Ocean. As fog flows through dragon's blood forests, tree canopies intercept the tiny water droplets, which coalesce on leaf and branch surfaces into larger drops that eventually fall to the ground as fog drip, creating precipitation that never fell as rain. The amount of water delivered through fog interception can equal or exceed direct rainfall in some locations, making the process critical for maintaining the soil moisture that sustains highland forests through long, dry periods. Without fog interception, the dragon's blood trees would likely be restricted to even smaller areas, or might not survive at all in Socotra's harsh climate, the fog providing the marginal additional moisture that makes the difference between survival and extinction. The trees have evolved characteristics that enhance fog collection. Their dense, umbrella-shaped canopies maximize surface area for droplet interception. Their leaf arrangement channels collected water toward the trunk and root system. Their entire architecture optimized for capturing moisture from air in a climate where water in any form represents precious resource. Socotra's endemic millipede species reach 15 centimeters in length. These decomposers processing leaf litter in the slow-paced nutrient cycles of arid ecosystems, where organic matter breaks down gradually through the combined action of invertebrates, fungi, and bacteria, working in conditions where moisture limitation slows all biological processes. The millipedes appear almost alien, segmented bodies bearing hundreds of legs that ripple in coordinated waves as the animals slowly crawl through leaf litter and soil, their dark exoskeletons armored against desiccation and predation. Unlike centipedes, which are predatory, millipedes feed on decaying plant material, their mouthparts adapted for chewing dead leaves and wood, breaking tough plant tissues into smaller particles that become more accessible to decomposer microorganisms. In Socotra's arid conditions, a fallen dragon's blood tree leaf might persist for months or years before completely decomposing, the slow breakdown rate determined by limited moisture and the tough, waxy nature of endemic plants' foliage that evolved to resist decay as part of water conservation strategies. Millipedes accelerate this process by fragmenting the litter and mixing it with soil, their digestive systems harboring microorganisms that begin breaking down plant compounds that would otherwise resist decay. The millipedes themselves become food for predators, including scorpions, centipedes, and some birds, transferring energy from dead plant material into animal tissues, connecting the decay pathway to the broader food web. Their endemic status suggests they've been isolated on Socotra long enough to diverge significantly from mainland millipede species, evolving characteristics adapted to the island's specific conditions of seasonal drought, endemic plant litter chemistry, and the absence or presence of particular predators and competitors. The island's coral reefs contain fish assemblages that show greater similarity to East African reefs 2,000 kilometers away than to Arabian Gulf reefs 600 kilometers north, a biogeographic pattern that reflects Socotra's ancient connection to Gondwana and ocean current patterns that favor larval transport from Africa rather than Arabia. Fish larvae drift with ocean currents during their planktonic stages, some species larvae remaining in the plankton for weeks or months before settling onto reef habitats where they transform into juveniles. The currents that flow past Socotra come primarily from the south and west, carrying water and whatever larvae it contains from East African coastal regions toward Arabia, with Socotra positioned directly in this flow path. Larvae originating from East African reefs therefore have greater probability of reaching Socotra than larvae from Arabian Gulf reefs, which would need to travel against prevailing currents to arrive at the island. Over evolutionary time, this directional bias in larval transport has shaped Socotra's reef fish community composition, favoring species with East African affinities and limiting representation of species primarily distributed in the Arabian Gulf and Persian Gulf regions. The pattern extends beyond fish to other reef organisms, including some corals and invertebrates, all showing the same biogeographic signature pointing toward East African connections. This demonstrates how ocean currents act as highways and barriers simultaneously, facilitating dispersal in the direction of flow while inhibiting movement against the current, their persistent directionality over millions of years shaping biological distributions across the marine realm in ways that don't always follow simple geographic distance patterns. This biogeographic pattern reflects Socotra's ancient connection to Gondwana and its separation from the Arabian Peninsula. Geological history that continues influencing biological distributions long after the tectonic events themselves concluded. The past preserved in present-day species distributions and ecological relationships. When Socotra separated from Africa during the opening of the Gulf of Aden, it carried with it the biota present at that time: plants, animals, and their associated ecological communities. These ancestral populations then evolved in isolation, producing many of the endemic species that characterize Socotra today. Meanwhile, the Arabian Peninsula underwent its own biological changes, its biota shaped by different climatic conditions, different geological events, and connections to Asian and European biogeographic regions that Socotra never experienced. The result is that despite currently sitting closer to Arabia than to Africa, Socotra retains biological signatures of its African origins, species that are more closely related to African forms than to Arabian ones, ecological communities that resemble African patterns more than Arabian ones. This creates a biogeographic anomaly, an island that belongs geopolitically to Yemen, yet biologically shows stronger ties to Africa, its position in space not matching its position in evolutionary and ecological terms. For biogeographers and evolutionary biologists, Socotra represents a natural laboratory for studying how geological history shapes biological distributions, how isolation produces endemism, and how barriers and corridors to dispersal determine which species can colonize islands and which cannot. The island's biota telling stories of ancient continental breakup, ocean current directions, and the long, slow process of evolution acting on isolated populations. Socotra's endemic grass species carpet the plateau after winter rains, these annuals completing their entire life cycles in 8 weeks before summer drought returns, racing through germination, growth, flowering, and seed production in a compressed time frame that demonstrates remarkable efficiency in resource use and reproductive timing. The grasses remain dormant as seeds through the harsh summer months, their embryos metabolically inactive inside protective seed coats that prevent premature germination during unsuitable conditions. When winter rains finally arrive, moisture penetrates the seed coats and triggers germination, internal hormones shifting to favor growth as stored carbohydrates power the emergence of roots and shoots. The seedlings grow rapidly under favorable winter conditions, cooler temperatures, adequate moisture, longer nights. Their growth strategy prioritizing speed over structural strength or defense, investing resources in rapid leaf production to maximize photosynthesis during the brief favorable period. Within 3 or 4 weeks, they begin flowering, diverting resources from vegetative growth to reproduction. Their flowers wind-pollinated and producing abundant pollen that drifts across the plateau on winter breezes. Seeds develop quickly, maturing before soil moisture depletes, the parent plants senescing and dying as they transfer their remaining resources into seed production. By the time summer heat arrives, the grasses have completed their cycle, leaving behind only dormant seeds scattered across the plateau, waiting for the next winter rains to trigger the next generation's brief moment of growth and reproduction the annual cycle repeating endlessly as long as the rains eventually return. The island's traditional astronomy identified star patterns used to predict monsoon timing. Knowledge preserved in oral traditions passed through generations of navigators and farmers whose livelihoods depended on accurate seasonal forecasts in an environment where mistiming could prove fatal to crops or dangerous for sailors caught at sea when monsoon winds arrived. The traditional astronomers noted which stars rose heliacally, appearing in the pre-dawn sky for the first time after a period of conjunction with the sun, on dates that correlated with monsoon onset. They observed that certain stars' positions at sunset or dawn marked the approximate timing of seasonal transitions, these celestial markers providing advance warning of approaching changes in wind patterns and rainfall probability. The knowledge was not recorded in writing, but rather memorized and transmitted through apprenticeship, young people learning from elders who had learned from their predecessors, the information encoded in stories, songs, and mnemonic devices that made the complex astronomical knowledge more memorable. This traditional astronomical knowledge represents sophisticated understanding of celestial mechanics and statistical correlation between astronomical events and weather patterns, empirical science developed through centuries of observation and practical testing, knowledge that worked reliably despite lacking the theoretical frameworks of modern meteorology. As modernization brings weather forecasts from satellite and computer models to Socotra, the traditional astronomical knowledge faces obsolescence, younger generations seeing no need to memorize star patterns when they can check weather apps on mobile phones, another form of environmental knowledge threatened by technological change and cultural shifts. Socotra's southwestern cliffs host nesting sooty falcons that migrate to Madagascar each winter, crossing 3,000 kilometers of open ocean in one of the Indian Ocean's most remarkable avian migrations. Small raptors navigating without landmarks across vast oceanic expanses to reach distant wintering grounds. The sooty falcons nest on cliff ledges during late spring and summer, timing their breeding so that chicks fledge when insect populations peak following winter rains, the parents hunting dragonflies, locusts, and other large insects to feed their growing young. As summer progresses toward autumn, the juveniles gain flight skills, and the adults begin physiological preparations for migration, accumulating fat reserves, their bodies shifting metabolism to support the demands of long-distance flight. When conditions become favorable, typically in October or November, the falcons depart Socotra, flying south and west across the Indian Ocean toward Madagascar, crossing thousands of kilometers of water where landing opportunities don't exist, their journey requiring sustained flight powered by fat reserves accumulated before departure. Navigation likely uses multiple cues: the sun's position, star patterns at night, possibly magnetic field sensing, perhaps even olfactory signals carried on winds. The birds integrating multiple information sources to maintain course toward wintering areas they've never seen before if making their first migration, yet somehow finding their way through inherited instructions encoded in their genes. They spend the austral summer in Madagascar, then return to Socotra the following spring, completing the circuit and beginning the cycle again. Their annual movements connecting Socotra to distant ecosystems, the birds feeding in one location and depositing nutrients in another, their lives spanning ocean basins and climatic zones in ways that remind us how migration creates biological connections across geographical spaces. The island's endemic cactus species, Caralluma socotrana, stores water in thick stems that swell after rains and gradually shrink through drought months, the plant's appearance transforming from plump and turgid when water is abundant to wrinkled and deflated during the harshest periods of summer desiccation. These stem succulents exemplify one of nature's most elegant solutions to water scarcity. Rather than developing deep root systems to access groundwater or large leaves to maximize photosynthesis, they store water in modified stems whose internal tissues act as biological reservoirs. The stems contain specialized water storage cells that can expand and contract without rupturing, allowing the plant to accommodate dramatic changes in water content across the seasons. After winter rains, the stems absorb water rapidly, swelling visibly within days as the storage tissues fill to capacity, the plant taking on a healthy, robust appearance. As months pass without rainfall, the stored water is gradually consumed to maintain minimal metabolic functions and replace water lost through the inevitable evaporation that occurs even through the thickened cuticle that coats the stem surface. The stems slowly shrink, their surfaces developing wrinkles and folds as the internal volume decreases, the plant appearing increasingly desiccated yet still alive, patiently enduring until the next rains arrive and allow the cycle to begin again. Flowers emerge during favorable periods, small blooms that appear almost incongruous on the utilitarian stem surfaces, their presence reminding us that even in survival-focused forms, reproduction remains the ultimate imperative driving plant life cycles. Socotra's air maintains exceptionally low pollution levels, allowing nighttime visibility of the Milky Way's galactic center, rarely seen from populated regions where artificial light and atmospheric pollution obscure all but the brightest stars. The island's darkness revealing the cosmos with a clarity that most modern humans never experience. On moonless nights, far from Hadibo's modest lights, the sky becomes overwhelming in its stellar abundance. Thousands of stars visible to the naked eye, the Milky Way stretching as a luminous band across the entire sky, its structure clearly visible as a river of light composed of innumerable distant suns. The galactic center, positioned in the constellation Sagittarius, appears as a bright bulge in the Milky Way's band, its concentration of stars creating a glow visible even without telescopes. Planets appear not as mere points, but as clearly non-stellar objects, their brightness and steadiness distinguishing them from the subtly twinkling stars. Satellites pass overhead regularly, unexpected moving lights that track across the fixed stars, humanity's technological presence visible even from this remote island. Meteor trails streak through the atmosphere with surprising frequency once your eyes adapt to darkness and you learn to watch patiently, bits of cosmic debris burning up as they encounter Earth's protective envelope of air. The dark-adapted eye can distinguish nebulae, cloudy patches among the stars that represent vast regions of gas and dust, where new stars are forming or where old stars have died, spreading their material back into space. This view of the cosmos, unmarred by light pollution or atmospheric haze, connects observers directly to the universe beyond Earth, offering perspective on our planet's place in the vast darkness punctuated by light, reminding us that we inhabit one world among countless others, our island on an island, spinning through space beneath rivers of ancient starlight. The island's traditional medicine utilized 80 different endemic plant species, knowledge systems now threatened as younger generations move to Hadibo's urban center where modern medicine replaces herbal remedies, the accumulated wisdom of centuries at risk of disappearing within a single generation. The traditional medical system developed through centuries of trial and error, practitioners learning which plants provided relief for which ailments, which preparations proved effective and which were useless or harmful, knowledge refined through countless individual cases and passed from experienced healers to apprentices. Different endemic plants serve different purposes. Dragon's blood resin for its antiseptic and astringent properties, aloe latex as a purgative, various barks and roots boiled into decoctions for treating fevers or digestive complaints, poultices made from crushed leaves applied to wounds or inflamed joints. The remedies weren't superstition, but rather empirical medicine, treatments that worked often enough to be retained and transmitted, though the practitioners lacked scientific understanding of why certain plants contained medically active compounds or how those compounds affected human physiology. Some traditional remedies likely contain genuinely useful medicinal compounds worthy of scientific investigation. Plants that evolved chemical defenses against insects or fungi sometimes produce compounds that also affect bacteria or viruses that cause human diseases, making endemic flora potential sources of novel pharmaceutical agents. But as traditional knowledge disappears, the information about which plants were used for which conditions and how they were prepared is being lost, making it increasingly difficult for researchers to know which of Socotra's hundreds of endemic species might harbor medically valuable compounds, the knowledge evaporating faster than it can be documented and transferred into scientific understanding. Socotra's UNESCO World Heritage designation in 2008 recognized the island as containing a unique and spectacular endemic flora, protecting 410 square kilometers of the most biologically significant areas, while acknowledging that the entire island functions as an integrated ecosystem requiring careful management. The World Heritage designation represents international recognition of Socotra's global importance, placing it alongside other irreplaceable natural and cultural sites whose preservation benefits all humanity, not just the nation within whose borders they happen to fall. The designation brings attention and potentially resources for conservation, but it also brings responsibilities and challenges, balancing protection of endemic species with the legitimate development needs of Socotri people, managing increasing tourism without allowing it to damage the fragile ecosystems that make the island worth visiting, addressing climate change impacts that threaten endemic plants adapted to conditions that may no longer persist as global temperatures rise and rainfall patterns shift. The protected areas encompass dragon's blood tree forests, important bird nesting sites, marine areas with healthy coral reefs, and examples of all the major ecosystem types represented on the island. Outside these protected zones, conservation depends on sustainable use practices and recognition by local communities that endemic species have value worth preserving. The challenge lies in making conservation compatible with improved living standards for Socotri people. If protecting dragon's blood trees means rural families cannot graze their goats in traditional areas, conservation creates hardship and will likely fail. But if protection can be achieved while supporting livelihoods through ecotourism or other means, it becomes more sustainable. UNESCO designation helps by raising the island's international profile, but ultimately, Socotra's future depends on decisions made by Socotri people and the Yemeni government about how to balance competing demands on limited land and resources. The island's dragon's blood trees can live 400 years, their growth rings recording climate variations across centuries when rainfall patterns shifted and temperatures fluctuated, each ring representing 1 year of growth, whose width indicates the favorability of conditions during that growing season. Tree ring analysis, dendrochronology, provides one of the most precise methods for reconstructing past climate in regions where trees form distinct annual rings, the width and density of each ring reflecting water availability, temperature during the growing season, and other environmental factors that affected photosynthesis and growth. Dragon's blood trees present challenges for dendrochronology. Their wood structure differs from typical temperate zone trees, and ring boundaries can be indistinct, making accurate counting difficult. But careful analysis can reveal growth patterns spanning centuries. Wide rings correspond to years with favorable rainfall and moderate temperatures when the trees could grow vigorously, while narrow rings indicate drought years or other stresses that limited growth. Sequences of wide or narrow rings reveal multi-year climate patterns, extended wet periods or prolonged droughts, providing information about climate variability before instrumental weather records began. The oldest living dragon's blood trees germinated around the year 1600, their lives spanning from the late Ottoman period through European colonialism, the modern era of Yemeni independence, all the changes of human history playing out while these trees slowly added ring after ring, their wood preserving climate history in physical form. Climate reconstruction from dragon's blood trees helps scientists understand whether current changes in Socotra's rainfall represent unprecedented shifts or fall within historical variability, contextualizing present conditions within the longer perspective that only centuries-old organisms can provide. Socotra's coastal fog forms when monsoon winds push surface water offshore, causing cold water to upwell and condensation to form above the temperature gradient, where warm, moist air passes over the suddenly cooler ocean surface. Upwelling occurs when sustained winds parallel to the coast push surface water offshore through Ekman transport, the tendency of wind-driven water movement to deflect at an angle from wind direction due to Earth's rotation. As surface water moves offshore, deeper water rises to replace it, this deeper water being colder than the surface layer that absorbed solar heating. When warm, humid air from over the tropical ocean encounters this cold, upwelled water, the air's temperature drops below its dew point, causing water vapor to condense into fog that hovers just above the ocean surface. The fog drifts onshore on the same winds that created the upwelling, appearing as gray banks that roll onto coastal cliffs and beaches, reducing visibility to mere meters and coating everything in moisture that condenses from the air. The phenomenon occurs primarily during the southwest monsoon season, when sustained winds from the appropriate direction maintain upwelling for weeks or months, the fog becoming a regular feature of life on the northern coast. The fog provides limited but precious moisture to coastal vegetation, plants intercepting tiny water droplets that coalesce and drip to the ground, supplementing the minimal rainfall that coastal areas receive. For humans, the fog creates challenges. It corrodes metal surfaces rapidly in the salt-laden air, reduces visibility for navigation and travel, and creates perpetually damp conditions that promote mold and fungal growth. Yet it also brings relief from summer heat and creates ethereal landscapes where familiar locations become mysterious and unfamiliar, the world reduced to soft gray shapes appearing and disappearing in the shifting mist. This fog phenomenon allowed human settlement in areas receiving almost no rain. Condensation from morning fog, providing critical moisture for cisterns that collected water dripping from structures or condensing on collection surfaces. The accumulated fog drip supplying drinking water when conventional rainfall proved insufficient. Traditional Socotri architecture incorporated fog collection into designs, though perhaps intuitively, rather than through explicit engineering. Roof surfaces that channeled condensation into collection vessels, courtyard arrangements that maximized surface area for fog interception, stone surfaces that promoted condensation through their thermal mass cooling below the dew point during night hours. In some coastal locations, fog drip might contribute more annual moisture than direct rainfall, the fog arriving with greater reliability than rain during the critical summer months when conventional precipitation essentially ceases. The water collected from fog, while not abundant, proved sufficient for maintaining small populations in locations that would otherwise be uninhabitable, allowing settlement patterns to extend into areas too dry for agriculture or conventional water sources. Modern water supply systems based on wells and imported supplies have reduced dependence on fog collection, but the phenomenon remains important for coastal vegetation and continues providing supplemental moisture that makes the difference between survival and failure for plants living at the margin of viability in Socotra's harsh coastal environment. The island's endemic land birds show no fear of humans, having evolved without significant predators, allowing close observation of feeding and nesting behaviors that would be impossible with more wary species that flee at the approach of people. This fearlessness, sometimes called island tameness, develops on isolated islands where birds experience few threats and thus lose the predator avoidance behaviors that mainland birds retain. Without large predatory mammals, snakes, or other threats that would favor wariness, natural selection on Socotra didn't maintain the expensive vigilance behaviors that divert time and energy from feeding and reproduction. The endemic starlings, sunbirds, and other species allow observers to approach within meters, the birds continuing their activities with minimal concern for nearby humans. You can watch sunbirds probing flowers for nectar, their curved beaks perfectly matched to flower shapes, pollen accumulating on their forehead feathers as they move from bloom to bloom. Socotran sparrows forage across the ground, searching for seeds and insects, their movements methodical and unhurried, even when people walk nearby. Cisticolas sing from exposed perches, their territorial songs carrying across highland valleys, the birds remaining on their singing posts, even when observers approach to within a few meters. This trusting behavior makes Socotra exceptional for birdwatching, allowing observations of behavior that remain difficult or impossible for the same species on continents where birds have learned through evolutionary experience to fear large mammals. The fearlessness also makes endemic birds vulnerable. Introduced predators like cats could devastate populations that lack appropriate defensive behaviors, a pattern seen tragically on many islands where human-introduced predators encounter naive native birds. Socotra has so far avoided this fate, but the risk remains as human activity increases and the chances of accidental or intentional predator introductions grow. Socotra's geological strata preserve fossils of ammonites and marine organisms from when these rocks formed beneath tropical seas 100 million years ago, the limestone serving as a vast museum holding specimens of ancient life rendered in stone, their forms still recognizable despite the eons separating their living moment from the present. The fossils appear in cross-section, where erosion has cut through limestone layers, exposing the internal chambers of ammonite shells, the spiral structures of ancient corals. Occasionally, the preserved remains of other marine creatures whose hard parts resisted decay and became mineralized, transforming from organic tissue into stone replicas that outlasted the organisms by millions of years. Ammonites, extinct relatives of modern nautilus and squid, swam in Cretaceous seas using jet propulsion, their coiled shells divided into gas-filled chambers that provided buoyancy, while the animal occupied the outermost chamber, tentacles extending to capture prey. When these creatures died, their shells sometimes sank to the sea floor and became buried in accumulating sediments, the calcium carbonate of their shells persisting as lime mud slowly compressed into limestone around them. Over geological time, the original shell material sometimes dissolved and was replaced by different minerals, creating fossils that preserve the original form in new material, while in other cases, the original shell remains chemically stable enough to persist for 100 million years. Finding these fossils requires searching exposed rock faces where erosion has revealed ancient seabeds, the fossils appearing as spiral patterns in the limestone, evidence of life from an era when dinosaurs still dominated Earth's continents and flowering plants had only recently evolved. The planet configured so differently that modern geography provides no guide to ancient arrangements of land and sea. The island's sandalwood trees, once harvested for export, now survive only in protected areas after centuries of overharvesting for their fragrant wood that became valuable in international trade, joining dragon's blood resin and aloe as Socotran products that faced such intense exploitation that the source populations dwindled toward extinction. Sandalwood produces aromatic compounds in its heartwood, the older, central wood that no longer transports water and nutrients but provides structural support. These compounds evolved as defense against wood-boring insects and fungal decay, but happen to produce fragrances that humans find pleasant and valuable. Sandalwood from various species across Asia has been traded internationally for millennia, used for incense, perfumery, religious ceremonies, and carved objects, the wood commanding high prices that incentivize harvesting beyond sustainable levels. Socotra's sandalwood faced similar pressure, trees cut for their aromatic heartwood and exported through trading networks that connected the island to markets across the Indian Ocean and beyond. Unlike dragon's blood resin, which could be collected from living trees, sandalwood harvesting required killing the tree, making it inherently more destructive to populations. The slow growth rate of sandalwood trees meant that harvest rates quickly exceeded regeneration capacity, populations declining as mature trees were removed faster than young trees could grow to replace them. By the time conservation concerns arose, sandalwood had become rare on Socotra, surviving primarily in remote, inaccessible locations where harvest costs exceeded wood value, or in areas that received informal protection through traditional use restrictions. The few remaining populations are now officially protected, though enforcement remains challenging, given limited resources and the remote nature of many sites where sandalwood persists, the species serving as a cautionary example of how valuable endemic species can be harvested to near extinction when economic incentives overwhelm sustainability concerns. Socotra's fishermen read ocean conditions by observing bird behavior, using knowledge of which seabirds indicate nearby fish schools at different seasons. This ecological knowledge accumulated through generations of experience, providing practical navigation and fish-finding abilities that modern technology like fish finders and GPS achieves through different means. Certain seabirds feed by diving on schools of small fish near the surface. These feeding frenzies visible from considerable distance as birds wheel and plunge repeatedly at the same location, their activity marking concentrations of prey fish that themselves often indicate the presence of larger predatory fish like tuna driving the prey to the surface. Experienced fishermen recognize different species' behaviors. Terns diving in shallow water indicate different conditions than frigate birds harassing other species to steal their catches, boobies plunge diving from height versus cormorants pursuing fish underwater, each pattern providing information about fish species, depth, and whether the conditions favor setting nets or trolling lines. The fishermen also observe bird flight patterns during morning and evening, knowing that birds commuting between offshore feeding areas and coastal roosting sites follow routes that indicate productive fishing zones. Floating objects attract fish seeking shelter and shade in the open ocean, and birds often concentrate around such objects, their presence marking potential fishing locations. This ecological knowledge represents a form of literacy. reading the ocean's surface conditions and bird behaviors as texts that reveal hidden information about what lies beneath. Practical wisdom that improves fishing success rates and safety by helping fishermen make informed decisions about where to invest effort and how to navigate safely in an environment where conditions change constantly and mistakes can prove costly or dangerous. The island's plateau grasslands transform from brown to green within 48 hours of winter rains, dormant seeds germinating explosively when moisture arrives. The transformation demonstrating the remarkable speed with which life can activate after months of patience and dormancy. The seeds lying in the soil represent potential waiting for appropriate conditions, their embryos metabolically suspended in a state that can persist for years if necessary, though most germinate within 1 or 2 seasons if conditions permit. The seed coat protects the embryo from desiccation and prevents premature germination during unsuitable conditions. Internal chemistry balancing dormancy, maintaining compounds against germination-promoting ones. The system calibrated through evolution to trigger germination only when moisture and temperature indicate a reasonable probability of survival through reproduction. When rain finally penetrates the soil, water absorption activates enzymes that begin breaking down stored nutrients. Cellular metabolism shifts from dormancy to active growth. The embryo swells and breaks through the seed coat, sending roots downward into the moistened soil and shoots upward toward light and air. Within hours, the first signs of green appear as shoots emerge from soil, and within 2 days, the grassland's brown surface begins showing the green haze of countless emerging seedlings, their chlorophyll already capturing solar energy and converting it to the carbohydrates that will fuel explosive growth. The speed of the transformation reflects evolutionary pressure to minimize the time between moisture arrival and reproductive maturity. Every day counts when the entire growing season might last only 8 weeks. Plants that germinate quickly and grow rapidly, having the best chance of producing seeds before drought returns and ends the brief opportunity for completing life cycles. Socotra's endemic spiders include species that hunt without webs, pursuing prey through leaf litter using speed rather than silk traps. These active hunters representing a different ecological strategy than the familiar web-building spiders that wait patiently for prey to become entangled. Web building requires investment in silk production, energy diverted from other functions to create the protein fibers that form intricate traps, but webs provide efficient prey capture once constructed, allowing relatively sedentary hunting that conserves energy between prey captures. Active hunting spiders follow a different strategy. They invest energy in sensory systems to detect prey, in muscle development for speed and power, in neurology for coordinating rapid pursuit and capture, relying on movement and reaction rather than architectural traps. Socotra's hunting spiders patrol through the leaf litter layer that accumulates beneath dragons, blood trees, and other vegetation, their multiple eyes scanning for the movement of insects, millipedes, or other small invertebrates that constitute their prey. When prey is detected, the spider approaches using stalking behaviors that minimize alerting the target, then launches a rapid final rush, legs extending to grasp the prey, while chelicerae deliver paralyzing venom. The hunting occurs primarily at night, when both spiders and many of their prey are active, the darkness providing cover for hunters, while the cooler temperatures allow greater activity in an environment where daytime heat would exhaust these small-bodied organisms. The endemic spider's hunting behaviors evolved in Socotra's unique conditions. The specific assemblage of prey species available, the physical structure of microhabitats where hunting occurs, the presence or absence of competitors and predators, producing forms and behaviors adapted to circumstances found nowhere else. Another thread in the complex ecological tapestry that makes the island remarkable. The island's ancient trade in dragon's blood resin continued until the 1960s, when synthetic dyes replaced natural sources in international markets, ending millennia of commerce that had connected Socotra to distant civilizations and provided economic foundation for the island's human communities. For centuries, dragon's blood resin represented one of Socotra's most valuable exports, the red substance commanding high prices for use as a dye, in medicine, as a varnish component, and in various other applications that valued its color and chemical properties. Harvesting the resin required climbing to highland areas where dragon's blood trees grow, making cuts in the bark to stimulate resin flow, collecting the hardened resin after it had solidified, then transporting it to coastal areas where traders purchased it for export. The trade provided cash income for rural Socotri families who otherwise subsisted largely through herding and limited agriculture, money that allowed purchase of goods unavailable on the island, metal tools, cloth, tea, and other items that reached Socotra through the same trading networks that carried dragon's blood resin away. The development of synthetic dyes during the 20th century undermined natural dye markets worldwide. Chemical dyes proved cheaper, more consistent in quality, available in colors difficult to achieve with natural sources, and not dependent on variable harvests from remote locations. As synthetic alternatives displaced natural dyes, demand for dragon's blood resin collapsed, prices falling until harvesting became economically unviable. The trade's end removed economic incentive for sustainably managing dragon's blood trees, but it also eliminated the over-exploitation pressure that had threatened some populations during periods of high demand, the collapse of markets providing inadvertent conservation benefit by making the trees valueless in commercial terms, though not in ecological or conservation terms. Socotra's winds sculpt limestone into tuffoni formations, honeycomb weathering patterns created when salt crystallization erodes rock surfaces through a process more chemical than mechanical. Crystals growing in pores and fractures generating sufficient force to break apart mineral grains and progressively enlarge cavities in the rock face. Tuffoni appear as clusters of cavities, each cavity ranging from a few centimeters to over a meter across, their interiors smoothed by wind-driven sand, while their rims often show sharp edges where rock remains less eroded, the overall effect resembling honeycomb or sponge structures carved into solid stone. The formation process begins with moisture entering porous rock, carrying dissolved salts from sea spray, bird droppings, or minerals present in the rock itself. As the moisture evaporates, salt concentration increases until crystals begin forming, and as crystals grow, they exert pressure on surrounding rock. Repeated wetting and drying cycles cause crystals to grow and dissolve repeatedly, each cycle breaking apart more mineral grains, the rock gradually disintegrating into sand that wind removes, leaving behind expanding cavities. The process concentrates in zones where moisture accumulation and evaporation occur most intensely. In sheltered alcoves protected from direct rain but exposed to spray and humidity, on surfaces where capillary action draws moisture from the rock interior toward exterior surfaces. Tuffoni often develop preferentially on certain rock layers or in areas where the stone has particular chemical or structural characteristics that favor the weathering process, creating patterns that reveal hidden variations in rock properties invisible in unweathered surfaces. The formations add sculptural beauty to Socotra's limestone landscapes, natural artworks created by patient interaction of salt, water, and stone over centuries or millennia. The island's freshwater springs emerge at the contact zone between porous limestone and impermeable rock layers, geological boundaries that control water flow and determine where underground water returns to the surface as springs that provide critical water sources for wildlife and human communities. Water percolating downward through limestone follows the path of least resistance, moving through interconnected pores, fractures, and solution channels that create complex three-dimensional networks of underground flow. This downward movement continues until the water encounters an impermeable layer, often a dense limestone bed with minimal porosity, or a different rock type like shale or basalt, which blocks further downward percolation and forces water to flow laterally along the impermeable layer's upper surface. Where this impermeable layer intersects the land surface, often along valley walls or at the base of cliffs, groundwater emerges as springs, the underground flow suddenly becoming visible as water seeps or flows from the rock face. The spring locations thus map underground geology, each spring marking a place where the invisible plumbing of subsurface water systems connects to the surface. The flow rates vary seasonally and annually, responding to recharge patterns determined by rainfall. After wet winters, springs flow more vigorously as the aquifer's hydraulic pressure increases, while during prolonged drought, flow diminishes as the stored water gradually drains away. Some springs flow year-round, sustained by large enough aquifer storage to persist through the dry season, while others are seasonal, flowing only during and shortly after wet periods before drying up until the next rains recharge the system. Springs create oases in Socotra's otherwise harsh environment, their reliable water supporting concentrations of vegetation, attracting wildlife, and serving as settlement sites for human communities who build their lives around these precious water sources. Socotra's endemic butterflies include day-flying moths adapted to highland conditions, their larvae feeding exclusively on endemic plant species in relationships that evolved over millions of years of isolated coevolution between insects and plants, each adapting to the other in an ongoing evolutionary dialogue. The distinction between butterflies and moths can be subtle, but generally, butterflies fly during daylight, have clubbed antennae, and rest with wings vertical, while moths are often nocturnal, have feathered or thread-like antennae, and rest with wings folded horizontally, though exceptions exist for both groups, including Socotra's day-flying moths that have adopted butterfly-like behavior patterns. These moths have larvae that feed on specific endemic plants. The caterpillars adapted to digest the particular chemical compounds those plants produce. Their detoxification systems capable of handling defensive compounds that would sicken or kill generalist herbivores. The plants in turn may have evolved specific defenses in response to herbivory pressure from these insects, producing increasingly toxic or deterrent compounds, while the insects evolved increasingly sophisticated means of circumventing those defenses, the coevolutionary arms race playing out over countless generations. The adult moths visit flowers for nectar, inadvertently providing pollination services that benefit the plants even while their larvae feed on the same plant's foliage. The relationship mixing antagonism and mutualism in complex ecological networks where a single species can play multiple roles depending on life stage and context. The endemic moth's restriction to Socotra reflects their dependence on endemic host plants found nowhere else. If the plants disappeared, the moths would disappear as well, and vice versa, their fates interconnected through evolutionary history. The island's traditional poetry preserves ecological knowledge, songs describing plant locations and seasonal changes in metaphorical language that encodes practical information about the environment within artistic expression. The poems serving as both cultural artifacts and as mnemonic devices for remembering important subsistence information. Traditional societies worldwide often embed practical knowledge in songs, stories, and poems whose artistic elements make them more memorable than simple factual statements. Rhythm, rhyme, and metaphor enhance memory retention and facilitate oral transmission across generations who might not encounter certain situations until the specific knowledge becomes relevant. Socotra poems describe which plants grow in which valleys, when certain flowers bloom, signaling appropriate times for activities like harvesting or traveling, where water can be found during dry seasons, which signs indicate approaching weather changes. The metaphorical language might seem purely decorative to outsiders, but carries specific meaning to those within the cultural tradition. References to the valley where the frankincense whispers, identifying a particular location through poetic description that community members recognize. The songs get sung during work, during social gatherings, passed from elders to young people as part of cultural transmission that maintains group identity while also preserving practical knowledge essential for thriving in Socotra's challenging environment. As modernization changes island life, bringing formal education in Arabic and reducing dependence on traditional environmental knowledge, these poems risk being forgotten, their dual role as art and practical guide no longer necessary. When people get ecological information from books and websites rather than from songs learned in childhood, another form of cultural and environmental knowledge threatened by the transition toward globalized modernity. Socotra's northern coastal plain receives ocean spray that increases soil salinity, limiting agriculture to date palms and a few salt-tolerant vegetables. The salt accumulation demonstrating how maritime influences shape terrestrial ecosystems even hundreds of meters from the shore. Ocean spray forms when waves break against shorelines or when strong winds blow across wave tops, tearing off droplets that become suspended in air and travel inland on the wind, sometimes kilometers from their ocean source. The spray droplets contain dissolved salts at the same concentration as seawater, about 35 grams of salt per liter. And when they settle on soil or vegetation, the water evaporates, leaving the salt behind, gradually accumulating salt in surface soils and on plant leaves. Over time, this deposition raises soil salinity to levels toxic for salt-sensitive plants, their roots unable to extract water from soil solutions more concentrated than their internal fluids. The plants essentially experiencing physiological drought, even in moist soil, because osmotic gradients prevent water uptake. Only halophytes, salt-tolerant species, can survive in soils with high salinity, these adapted plants having special mechanisms for excluding salt from uptake, sequestering it in specific tissues, or actively excreting it through specialized glands. Date palms show moderate salt tolerance, allowing them to persist in coastal areas that receive spray, though their productivity declines compared to less saline locations. Most food crops cannot tolerate the salt levels found on Socotra's spray-affected coastal plains, limiting agricultural possibilities and forcing most cultivation into inland valleys, where salt accumulation remains minimal. The salt effect extends beyond direct toxicity. It influences which natural vegetation species can grow in coastal areas, shapes animal distributions, as herbivores seek plants with lower salt content, and affects human settlement patterns as communities balance coastal access for fishing against the challenges of agriculture and water supply in saline environments. The island's endemic olive species produces small fruit that traditional Socotra culture never pressed for oil, instead using the wood for construction, the plant valued for its material properties rather than its potential as a food source, demonstrating how different cultures utilize the same species differently based on local needs and traditions. Olives worldwide have been primarily cultivated for oil production for millennia. Mediterranean civilizations building entire agricultural systems around olive cultivation, pressing ripe fruits to extract oil used in cooking, lighting, religious ceremonies, and various other applications. Socotra's endemic olive apparently never entered similar use, perhaps because the fruit remained too small or bitter for efficient oil production, or perhaps because date palm cultivation already satisfied oil needs through sale of surplus dates, allowing purchase of imported oil, making olive oil production unnecessary despite the presence of olive trees. The wood, however, proved valuable, hard, dense, and resistant to rot, properties that made it excellent for construction purposes. The relatively small size of available timber, suiting it for use in roof beams, door frames, and other structural elements in traditional houses. The alternative use pattern shows how species roles in human cultures are not predetermined, but rather emerge through interaction between biological properties and cultural contexts. The same plant providing different resources in different societies depending on what else is available and what traditions develop around resource use. Today, Socotra's endemic olives are protected, their cutting for timber largely prohibited as conservation concerns override traditional use patterns, though enforcement remains incomplete, and some harvest continues in remote areas where monitoring is limited. Socotra's dragon's blood forests show signs of regeneration failure, with adult trees lacking younger replacements in areas where goat browsing prevents seedling survival, creating age structures where the current generation may be the last, their eventual death leaving gaps that won't be filled because the recruitment pipeline has been severed by herbivory pressure. The forests appear deceptively healthy at casual inspection, impressive ancient trees with their characteristic umbrella canopies creating dramatic landscapes. But demographic analysis reveals the underlying problem. Seedlings germinate successfully after rains, tiny dragon's blood trees just a few centimeters tall, emerging in the protection of rocks or beneath adult trees. But as they grow beyond initial establishment size, they become vulnerable to goat browsing. And in areas with sufficient goat density, almost all seedlings get eaten before reaching heights beyond browse range. The few saplings that survive often show evidence of repeated browsing, multiple stems growing from damaged main trunks, asymmetrical shapes where one side was eaten more than another, stunted growth as the plant repeatedly regenerates browsed tissues rather than adding height. In some forests, virtually no intermediate aged trees exist, the population structure showing only ancient adults and tiny seedlings with nothing in between. A demographic profile indicating recruitment failure. When the current adult trees eventually die, whether from old age, storm damage, or disease, they won't be replaced, and the forest will slowly transition to different vegetation as gaps fill with species that goats browse less, or that reproduce prolifically enough to saturate herbivore capacity. The situation illustrates a classic conservation challenge. Traditional land use practices that were sustainable at historical population levels become unsustainable as human and livestock populations increase. But changing those practices conflicts with livelihood, needs, and cultural traditions, creating tensions between conservation and development that lack simple solutions. The island's mystique persists in its botanical isolation, where nearly 4 out of every 10 plant species evolved nowhere else on Earth. This extraordinary endemism rate, placing Socotra among the world's most irreplaceable ecosystems, natural heritage that if lost, could never be recreated, because evolution doesn't repeat exactly. Endemism results from isolation combined with time. Populations separated from their mainland relatives gradually diverge through genetic drift and natural selection, acting on random mutations. The isolated populations accumulating genetic differences until they become distinct species unable to interbreed with their ancestors. The longer the isolation persists and the more severe the geographic barrier, the greater the divergence becomes, producing increasingly unique species found nowhere else. Socotra's 37% plant endemism reflects 6 million years of isolation, combined with harsh environmental conditions that drove adaptation in directions different from mainland evolution, the island becoming a factory for producing new species through the patient work of evolution, operating on isolated populations. Each endemic species represents a unique evolutionary experiment, a solution to survival challenges that emerged nowhere else, genetic information that exists only in Socotra's populations and would be irretrievably lost if those populations disappeared. This makes conservation on Socotra particularly urgent. Unlike protecting widespread species where populations in other regions provide backup if one population fails, endemic species have no other populations, their entire existence concentrated in limited areas on this one island. If dragon's blood trees disappear from Socotra, they disappear from Earth entirely. If Socotran aloes go extinct, that genetic lineage ends permanently. The mystique of Socotra thus carries weight beyond aesthetic appreciation. This is one of Earth's irreplaceable places, a natural laboratory that has produced life forms existing nowhere else in the universe, a responsibility that extends beyond local or national concerns to encompass humanity's collective interest in preserving the full diversity of life that Earth has produced through billions of years of evolution. Socotra remains a place where evolution continues writing its slow story in limestone and endemic life. An island that measures time not in years, but in the patient accumulation of difference, where isolation becomes creativity and separation generates uniqueness through processes that have operated since that fragment of continent drifted away from Africa 6 million years ago and began its independent trajectory through geological time. The island exists simultaneously as geography and as living record of evolutionary process, each endemic species a chapter in the ongoing story of life adapting to circumstances, solving problems, persisting through changes in climate and environment. The dragon's blood trees record centuries in their growth rings, while their genes record millions of years of divergence from mainland ancestors. The blind cave fish carry in their DNA the history of isolation and adaptation to darkness. The endemic snails, birds, plants, and insects each represents evolutionary time made physical, deep history preserved not in museum specimens, but in living populations still interacting, competing, reproducing, dying, the entire ecological community continuing to evolve even now as conditions change and new selection pressures emerge. Standing on Socotra's plateau beneath dragon's blood trees, looking across limestone hills toward the Indian Ocean beyond, you witness not just a landscape, but a process, evolution in action, nature's ongoing experiment with form and function, the creative power of isolation and time, made visible in the strange and beautiful endemic life that makes this island one of Earth's most extraordinary places, a reminder that our planet continues generating novelty and wonder through processes that operate across timescales longer than human history, deeper than human memory, ancient as life itself, yet still continuing, still writing new chapters in the endless story of evolution. And so we conclude our journey through Socotra, this fragment of ancient Gondwana that drifted into isolation and became a living archive of evolutionary divergence. We've wandered through highlands where dragon's blood trees catch fog beneath umbrella canopies that have sheltered these mountains for centuries, descended into limestone caves holding inscriptions from sailors across 2 millennia who sought refuge from monsoon storms, and observed how 6 million years of separation creates uniqueness on botanical and geological scales that remind us how patient nature can be in crafting distinctiveness. The island reminds us that Earth's most extraordinary places often hide in plain sight, floating in the Indian Ocean far from shipping lanes and tourist circuits, their strangeness requiring no dramatic volcanoes or extreme climates, but rather emerging from the quiet persistence of endemic life, adapting across millions of years to limestone plateaus and seasonal isolation. Socotra's wonder lies not in spectacle, but in specificity, in the fact that nearly 4 out of every 10 plant species exist nowhere else in the universe, that bottle trees grow from cliff faces in defiance of gravity, that frankincense peels its bark like paper to reveal green tissue beneath, that blind fish navigate underground pools in perpetual darkness using senses we barely understand. As you drift toward sleep, perhaps you'll carry with you images of umbrella-shaped trees bleeding red resin under starlit skies unmarred by light pollution, of valleys where families live 20 kilometers apart beneath peaks shrouded in fog, 150 days each year, of coastal lagoons where sandbars shift with lunar rhythms and juvenile fish shelter in turquoise shallows. These details represent what makes our planet endlessly fascinating. That an island 125 kilometers long can contain 307 plant species found nowhere else. That geological separation measured in millions of years becomes biological innovation, visible in every endemic flower and twisted trunk. That the strange and the beautiful often occupy the same coordinates on maps that fail to capture the deeper truth of what makes places irreplaceable. The dragon's blood forests stand as living monuments to time itself, individual trees that began growing when medieval traders sailed past collecting resins, their growth rings recording 4 centuries of climate variation, 4 centuries of patient survival, while human civilizations rose and fell in the world beyond. The limestone beneath holds fossils from seas that covered this land when dinosaurs walked continents, configured in ways unrecognizable to modern geography, each layer of stone a page in Earth's autobiography, written in the language of accumulated sediments and preserved life. In our age of rapid change and instant connection, Socotra persists as a reminder that some processes cannot be hurried, that uniqueness emerges only through the patient work of isolation and adaptation, that what has taken 6 million years to create deserves protection that extends beyond economic calculation or immediate utility. The endemic species carry in their genes information that exists nowhere else, evolutionary experiments that, if lost, could never be repeated, because evolution doesn't work backwards, and the specific conditions that produce these forms will never recur in exactly the same way. Until we meet again in some other corner of Earth's geography, may your rest be peaceful and deep. May the knowledge that such places as Socotra exist bring you quiet wonder as you sleep. May you dream of islands where evolution writes stories in living forms, where fog feeds ancient forests, where the strange becomes beautiful through familiarity, where our planet's creativity continues unfolding in patterns too slow for human lifetimes to witness fully but visible nonetheless in the accumulated differences that make endemic species what they are, utterly unique, irreplaceable, and worthy of preservation. Good night, and may the gentle strangeness of Socotra accompany you into peaceful dreams of islands both real and imagined, where wonder persists in the patient details of geology and endemic life.